Imagine you have one line, which is an attacking line. We're not talking about any London system, and you could play it against anything. Black throws against you. That's the King's Indian attack. And I'm sure you know how aggressive the King's Indian defense is. I'm going to be walking you from 500 all the way to 2000, teaching you all the openings, the attacking plans, the middle game plans, the end game ideas, basically everything that you need to know about the King's Indian attack. What I want you to do is to watch the full video and just apply what you learned from this video in your games and just watch how your ratings will go through the roof. Picking things off in the 500 region, it's a very simple setup. As I said, this can be played against anything that black throws at you. For example, he decided to play this move. We're just going to be continuing with pawn g3. The plan is to play bishop to g2 and simple castle. So if he does not try to do anything to affect us, we're just going to go bishop g2 and castle the king. Knight to f6, we castle the king, and just like that, step one is out the way. The good thing about this is you don't have to worry about king safety because you castle your king as quickly as you possibly can. You also don't have to worry about the opponent attacking your king because it's very hard to attack someone's king when there's a fianchetted bishop. He plays bishop e6. Usually, when they do this, the plan is to go queen d7, bishop h3, but he is blocking out his pawn on e7. So, this is already not good. So, let's just move on to step two, which is to get these pieces in the game. A pawn always goes to d3. You're not going to be putting your pawn on d4 because the purpose of putting the pawn on d3 is so that way you're able to play moves like knight d2 followed by pawn e4. This pawn on c3 usually, well, the pawn on c2 usually goes to c3, and the queen usually goes to e2 or c2. The bishop on c1 is going to be your last piece that gets development. He plays g6. Looks like he's going for some fianchetto himself. And I'm trying to play knight d2 followed by e4 here. I'm also thinking of just knight g5 taking the bishop, but that would be me moving the same piece more than once. So let's continue with the idea. Knight d2. We are blocking in our dark squared bishop, but as we said, it's going to be the last piece that needs development. And it's okay for us to focus on developing the other pieces first. So bishop to g7 was played. Let's play pawn to e4 here, just immediately thrusting forward in the center of the board. Usually we take with the pawn, and then the queen goes to e2, a pawn goes to c3, the queen could also goes to c2. He decided to castle the king, not bad. And already I'm thinking about just playing pawn to e5, attacking the knight. He would simply move the knight though, and then pawn d4 guards the pawn, maybe pawn to f6, and I'm not necessarily gaining any advantage from that. So let's just play the move rook to e1. Let's just get the rook in the game. Pawn c3 eventually I'll play. And sometimes you could play pawn c3 followed by pawn b4 to start an attack on the queen side. So it's very, very flexible on where you're planning on attacking. So rook e8 was played. Now I'm thinking of playing e5, but eventually he should be able to play pawn to f6. But let's go pawn to e5 and attack the knight. I'm already forcing the knight to move out the way. Knight back to d7 is what I'm expecting now. And the reason why I played rook to e1 was so that way I'm able to keep my pawn on e5 guarded because I'm trying to play moves like knight g5 and get rid of this bishop. I'm also trying to play moves like pawn to d4 to ensure that I just have enough space in my position. He decided to play knight g4 though, which I wasn't really expecting that move. He is attacking my pawn 3 times. I'm only guarding it twice. So let's play pawn to d4, guarding the pawn. But if you already look on the position, white has some good space in the center of the board. The knight does not belong on g4. In fact, eventually, he's going to be forced to put the knight back on h6, which is on the edge of the board. And you don't really want to put your pieces on the edge of the board anyways. Knight to b4. Now, I know that you guys at the 500 level are trying to win at chess quickly. That's not the right approach. Like, you need pieces on the opponent's half of the board, but not this quickly. Because, first of all, I can just play a3. Like, if I play a3, he just has to pull the knight back. But the knight is really not doing anything. In fact, just to be principled, I'm gonna play a3. The move I'm not gonna play is c3, even though it looks really tempting, because if I play c3, I'm no longer guarding d3. The knight comes to d3, forking the rook and the bishop. So let's just play a3. Now look on the position. this is how not to play chess. You don't just put a knight on b4 so that way you can pull it back to c6, or worse would be to pull it on the edge of the board. So now the knight went back to c6. Again, my opponent is just wasting time. The move I would love to play here is knight to g5. Knight g5 also comes with a lot of tactical ideas. But if I play knight g5, then I'm no longer guarding d4, and I'm thinking of knight takes d4. And then if I take the bishop, the pawn takes. And the whole idea is to take this knight on g5, and I'm ahead by a piece. But knight takes c2 could be very, very tricky. Unless I'm able to set up some smothered mate, like take on e6 with check. And then once the king moves, I play knight to f3. And then once the king move again, I play knight to g5. But then there will be rook to f8. So let's just play pawn c3. We're going to play pawn c3. Very nice pawn chain that we have here. And then I'm going to have the idea of playing knight g5. So pawn b4, another move that's not necessary. I mean, maybe he's trying to play a5 b4. Would have been best to at least try to play queen d7 and connect the rooks. Now I'm going to play knight g5, and he has to be very careful because I'm threatening and removing the guard tactic. If you look on the position, the bishop is the only defender of the knight. So if he allows me to get rid of his bishop, then I'm going to be winning the knight, which he didn't. So he's definitely playing some chess, but he still needs to be very careful because there's some very cool ideas in this position where if he's not careful, he could actually lose the game. Now, here's what I'm seeing. If I take the bishop and the pawn takes, I win the knight. If I take the bishop and the queen takes, the queen and the knight is now on the same diagonal. And because of that, I'm able to hit him with bishop h3, and that's a pin. So let's go with that idea. And I'm also already applying pressure to the pin knight. So if he's not careful on exactly how he's going to be reacting to this, he could be losing some material for sure, for sure. So the queen went to e6. I am also thinking of knight b3 to c5. That's just a good score for the knight, but let's go with bishop h3. This is called a pin, by the way. I'm thinking of moves like knight takes f2, and then if I take his knight, he takes my bishop and he's winning. And if I take his queen, he takes my queen. But then his knight is going to be under attack. Pawn to f5 was a good try. Does not work though. In fact, he is going to be losing material in this position. Because first of all, the queen is also on the same line as my rook. And once I play this illegal pawn move, en passant, on f6, the queen is under attack. I am applying pressure to the pin knight. If he takes with the knight, there goes the queen. He has to move the queen, by the way. So he basically has to take with the queen. And then once I take on g4, we're just already ahead by an entire piece. So ensure that your guy's tactics is very sharp. Whoa, he decided to take with the bishop. He just completely missed that his queen was under attack. And, we're going to be seeing stuff like this at the 500 level, but let's just take the queen. Now I'm attacking this knight and I'm attacking this knight. So I'm also about to win another piece. So it's just completely game over here. So he plays pawn to h5. And again, that's just free material, but I'm ahead in material. So I'm trying to trade pieces off the board. So before I take this knight, let's just take this knight on g4 because I have two pieces guarding, plus his g6 pawn is weak. Before I take on g6, however, I take on c6. Now I'm ahead by 12 points. And yeah, it's just over now. I'm going to take here. I'm going to get my knight in the game. And this should be checkmate in at least 5 moves. Let's say 5 moves. So the king moves to f7. Now we take the pawn. My knight is going to f3. My bishop is finally going to g5. And this is why I say usually the bishop is one of the last pieces to get developed. He moves the rook out, though. He moves the rook to guard the pawn. Now we play knight to f3. And the whole idea is just to ensure that I get all my pieces in the attack here. Pawn to e5 is interesting, but my knight covers that square, and I'm seeing some very cool ideas. For example, my knight taking on e5, and then if the bishop takes, my queen is able to take on g6 because the rook protects the g6 square. So let's go with that idea. And if he does not take and he decides to move the king, queen to d7 is just going to be a checkmate in 2 moves. So he's basically forced to take. And then once he take, we don't take back. We take on g6 first with check. And this is going to be checkmate in at least 3 moves, if I'm not wrong. Well, pulling the king back to f8 is making it simpler for me because now I'm able to play bishop h6, bringing more pieces in the game with tempo. His king is now really forced to go to this e7 square, and the checkmate that I'm seeing is queen to e6 check. The king has to go to e8, then I go bishop back. If he blocks with the bishop or the rook, I just take, and it's going to be a checkmate. So let's give a check here. King moves, now we check here. And again, it doesn't matter what he blocks with. Once I eventually take them off the board, we're just looking on a checkmate. But more kings Indian attack against 600 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 600. One opening plays against anything that black throws at you. D6, we play G3. It looks as if it's going to be King's Indian attack versus King's Indian defense. These are usually some very interesting positions. Knight f3, we castle the king. They also castle the king. Now, this is called a symmetrical position where it's exactly the same thing. Let's play pawn to d3. I'm trying to see if he's gonna literally just copy every move I play. Well, he decided to play knight to c6. Once we already deal with the king side, we're just trying to get these pieces out. One thing to keep in mind, please do not be in a rush to develop your dark squared bishop. You could just get away with playing moves like knight d2. Eventually, the pawn is going to e4. We're going to be playing moves like pawn c3 as well. Now, it would have also been good to play e4 before knight d2 in some cases, so that way when they play d5, you could play e5. But he plays d6. Let's play e4. And this is basically the setup that you guys are going for. Pawn to e5 was played, and a lot of times you're going to be able to see your pawn on the c3 square. A pawn on c3 does so much. For one, you're able to play d4 in the future and get a very nice center. Two, you're able to play b4 and start an attack on the queen side. Now the opponent plays d5. I mean, it's kind of weird that he plays d6, then he plays d5. Personally, I think he's just wasting time. But this queen usually goes to c2 or e2. In this position, it does not matter too much. So let's just put the queen on c2. Eventually, I want the rook on d1. If he takes and I takes, my knight will be getting the c4 square. And a queen on e2, by the way, defends the knight on c4. So if you're concerned and you want to ensure that all your pieces are coordinated and protecting each other, then putting the queen on e2 followed by knight c4 is the way. Okay, he plays pawn to d4. Upon pawn to d4, we don't necessarily have to immediately react to the move. I mean, we are able to take, doesn't really gain or lose anything. So let's just, I'm not going to use the word punish, but it's basically, I'm going to use the word punish, but I don't really mean punish. But basically, the pawn is no longer exploit. That's the word. I'm going to exploit the fact that the pawn no longer covers c4, and then my knight is going to get to the c4 square. Now I have two pieces attacking the e5 pawn. He only has one piece guarding the pawn. And one thing I like to say a lot is whenever you have a knight on the c4 square, you have to ensure that you're always on the lookout for pawn to b5 because pawn to b5 will attack the knight. So it's usually good to play moves like pawn to a4 to prevent the opponent from playing pawn to b5. But now he has to play something like rook e8 or queen e7, anything to not lose his e5 pawn. Rook to e8 was played, and now I'm just trying to finish my development. Again, I'm able to take knight takes takes. I just don't gain much. So I'm just gonna play the move bishop to, let's just play the move bishop to d2 to connect the rooks. The bishop is still active here. Eventually, I want to be able to take and then play b4 followed by b5. Because remember I told you guys, this c3 idea comes with ideas of playing b4. But once I play b4, he may be able to take on c3. And I want to be able to take with the bishop and target his e5 pawn if that happens. But I did not play a4. I did not play a4, which means if my opponent plays b5, I deserve it. Because I clearly said if you have a knight on c4, you need to play a4 to prevent b5. The good thing is, if they do play b5, then it weakens their knight and their knight is left unprotected. My opponent decided to play bishop to e6, though, which is a drawback mistake. One of the popular ways how persons blunder, where the rook was actually one of the main defenders of his e5 pawn. So now I'm able to take on e5. I have two pieces attacking e5. It's actually tricky. I mean, I'm still going to take on e5, but after knight e5, there is bishop takes a2. And if I take his rook, he takes my knight. But it's very, very tricky because worst case scenario, I'm going to have the bishop here, which is considered to be an advantage. And this would be a discovered attack, by the way. Now, if he does that, I may not immediately take the bishop. I'm going to take on d4 first, so that way my knight is guarded. And if he takes my knight, I go bishop c3, force the queen to move, then I win the bishop. With that being said, bishop takes a2 is in fact a blunder. So he decided to take on c3. I'm considering taking with the pawn, but because my knight on e5 is unprotected, I'm going to take with the bishop, which means now my knight is safe. I can easily swing my pieces in the game. He decided to pull his knight back to d7. Not a bad move. I mean, the guy's trying to trade, but I'm the one who is ahead in material, so we're definitely going to be going for that trade. And both of the bishops are pointing towards each other. So he could decide to take on c3 first. If he does, I'm going to be able to either take with the queen or the pawn. Either way, my plan is to play d4 and get a very strong center. So he took with the queen. Because I know that to take is a mistake, let me just use the time to swing my rook in the game. This is an open file. By the way, there's no opponent's pawn that is on the c file. So if he decides to take, then my queen takes, and then I'm going to be attacking his weak c7 pawn. I mean, bishop to h3, I'm expecting, but that does not work. Rook to d8. I mean, that could work because if I takes, king takes, and then I take, the queen takes, but then I'm able to take on b7. But I don't want to be trading so many pawns, to be honest. I really don't want to be trading so many pawns. So let's just play rook to d1. Let me just guard my pawn and then try to win his pawn. So what he needs to play here is pawn to c6. There is bishop to g4. There's also bishop takes a2, but that's actually a blunder. He should be losing a piece in this position. Now, how I win the piece is important. Whenever people take on a2, pawn to b3 traps the bishop. But if I play b3 now, he takes on c3. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to take on g7. And then once the king reacts to that move, then I hit him with pawn to b3. And I'm basically winning his bishop. Like, I mean, he could just take the pawn, but I'll still take the bishop and win the bishop. So he took, let's just take back. And just like that, we are ahead by an entire piece. My queen is also attacking this unprotected pawn, so he has to be careful, which is why he plays pawn c6, guarding the pawn. But because my rook is on the same line as the queen, now I'm going to play the move pawn to d4, with the whole idea of playing pawn to d5, just opening up the position, trying to trade the pieces off the board. f5 is not a terrible try. But I think I'm able to play d5, and then if he takes, I'm able to take, and then his queen is under attack, and he will be in some trouble. So let's play d5. And if he decides to take on d5, I could choose whether I want to take with my rook and attack the queen, or take with the pawn, so that way I have a pass pawn. So he decided to take with the pawn. I'd like to take with the rook. I have a pass pawn. So, well, if I take with the rook, I wanted to say that my idea is to trade. And then once the queen move, I just trade and then I'm winning. But I also want to just take and I have a pass pawn, because then I just want to start rolling the pass pawns up the board. Pass pawns must be pushed. So the idea is to play pawn d6 followed by rook c7, especially since his queen and his king is on the same rank. So he decides to play pawn to b6. I mean, it weakens the c6 square. The whole idea is to rule the pass pawn. So let's hit him with pawn to d6. I am threatening to pin his queen, seeing that the queen and the king is on the same rank. I am also threatening to play bishop to c6. Okay, he played the move rook to c8, which prevented both of them. What to do? What to do? Let's say I take, then the rook takes. How do I get rid of this queen so I can push my pass pawn? Here's what I'm going to do. First, I'm going to take because I don't want him to take and remove the defender of my pawn. But then once his rook takes, my plan is to get my bishop on this diagonal, which is why I'm going to play the move bishop back to f1 with the idea of playing bishop to b5. And once I play bishop to b5 and hit the queen Queen is going to be forced to move, and that's one more move for my pass pawn. King to f6 doesn't do anything. Let's continue with the plan. Let's force the queen to move. And then once the queen move, I'll hit him with pawn to d7 and attack the rook. I'm sure I have some checkmating attacks as well, but I'm more focused on pushing my pass pawn. So queen f7, I guess he's just trying to trade the queens off the board, which is still completely winning for me. But I'm not going to trade here. I'm going to give a check because his king is mad weak. Like, I think, where does he even put his king? Maybe e6. But then if he plays king e6, he puts his king and his queen on the same diagonal, which means he has to be on the lookout for some bishop c4 idea, which is why he puts his king on g5. But now I'm able to just continue to roll my pass pawn up the board. Now he plays rook to d8. And in order to win this game, again, I could just try to mate his king. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. First, I'm going to give a check. So that way my pawn is heavily guarded. Once he moves the king, my idea is to get my rook to either e8 or c8 so that way I'm able to attack his rook. But before I do all of that, let's just play h4 and threaten a checkmate. So now I'm going to be forcing him to wait. I just missed that checkmate. Oh my lord. Bishop to e2 was a checkmate chat, but he decided to play g5, so that's also a checkmate. But more Kings Indian attack against 700 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 700. We're playing some Kings Indian attack. Knight c6 pre-move. Let's just play pawn g6. These moves can be played against anything that black plays. It really doesn't matter if he plays d5 or e5, f5, knight f6. We're always going to be developing our pieces. So knight to f6, we play bishop to g2, and we're just going to be castling on the next move. So basically, okay, when they play e5, do not allow e4. So if the pawn gets to e5 too quickly, play d3 so that way, if the pawn goes to e4, you take the pawn and you're fine. The opponent is developing very, very principled. So kudos to him. Let's get our king out the center of the board. And what I talk about a lot is you're not going to be getting attacked when you play this line. Plus, there's this idea that can be used in the pair, the kid. It can also be used in the King's Indian attack. And that's when the bishop is on c5, the knight protects the pawn. We are able to sacrifice our knight on e5. Because once the knight takes, pawn to d4 just forks it back. Doesn't mean that we're completely winning, but it makes the position way easier for us to play and way harder for the opponents to play. Someone tried bishop takes f2 thinking that they're slick, but it's actually just giving up the bishop pair and it makes the position a bit more easier for me. So after I play pawn to d4, forking back the pieces, black needs to choose the variation that does not lose the bishop. So pulling the bishop back would have been better. Let's just take on d4, attacking the knight. He pulls the knight back to attack my queen. Now my idea is to simply move my queen out the way. I'm thinking of just playing queen to h4, to be honest, and then bishop g5 and start some attack on this queen. Queen h4. Yeah, let's go queen h4. I'm lining up my queen towards his queen, but I'm also trying to attack his h7 pawn at the same time. And eventually, I should be able to play moves like bishop to g5. And if the pawn goes to h6, I sacrifice on h6. And, it's usually a very fun game. So he plays pawn to d6. Let's continue with our development here. Usually, we play knight d2, but there is somewhere to put my bishop. I don't want to rush it, even though if he plays h6, I double up his pawns and he's losing. But let's develop our pieces first. I could play bishop to g5 on the next move, but my opponent, he's on the 700. So we're not going to be bullying him or anything, but he did blunder his knight on d4. So let's just take the knight on d4. Now it's just over, to be honest. Like, I'm still going to play bishop g5. He plays bishop g4, still going to play bishop g5, pinning the knight. And he is also at risk of losing another piece because keep in mind, what is this guy doing? Come on, Marcus. My knight guards the square, bro. That's just two pieces. Come on, Marcus, bro. And then he decided to resign. Our opponent is now 800. Let's continue to play some Kia. Now, as we discussed, we're just going to be playing pawn g3, bishop g2, and simply castle or king. This setup is the first thing that you guys need to keep in mind. After you get this setup out the way, that's when the more aggressive setup comes in. My opponent is going for a double fianchetto, which is usually not too bad, but let's play pawn to d3 with the whole idea of playing pawn to e4. And what I'm about to do is, once I play the move pawn to e4, this bishop is not as active anymore. I mean, my bishop is pointing towards my pawn, but it's a bit more mobile. And then I'm going to play the move pawn to c3. Now, usually when they play pawn to d5, attacking the pawn, we are able to play moves like pawn to e5, just pushing past, attacking the knight, forcing the knight to move again. We're basically forcing them to move the same piece more than once in the opening stage of the game. And usually when they put their knight on g4, they're just asking for trouble. Like a lot of time, the knight could just get trapped. But let's play the move queen to e2, guarding the pawn. He's attacking the knight twice. I'm just going to play queen e2. So not that way, I'm guarding the knight twice, and then he plays pawn to d4. That's not a bad move. He's basically ensuring that his bishop gets a long diagonal. And it looks like he's trying to do a little removing the guard tactic, which will not work, but I see his idea. Let's just continue with our development though. Let's go knight to d2. And what I like to tell you guys is don't worry too much about the c1 bishop. Eventually, your bishop is going to join the game. So knight c6 was played. He's attacking my pawn 3 times. I'm only defending it twice. So I have to be careful here. But what I'm going to do is, instead of trying to defend the pawn, I'm just going to move it forward. Because if he takes, then I take. I'm actually attacking his unprotected knight. Otherwise, if he plays something like pushing the pawn, then I would have had a very annoying pawn. So now he has to ensure that he does not lose this knight. I'm assuming he's going to pull it back to either h6 or f6. He also needs to ensure that moves like knight to g5 is not some checkmating threats or winning his knight on c6. I'm not going to lie, I think my opponent is already in trouble because once he plays knight to f6, because my bishop is on the same diagonal as his bishop, first of all, knight e5 is very strong because if he takes, I take, hit the rook. No, that's not really strong. Let's play knight g5. I'm threatening to play the move queen to f7 check. It's not a checkmate, but once the king moves, I'm going to win a bishop. In addition to that, I'm also attacking his c6 knight twice. So now that he plays the move rook to f8, defending the f7 square, because I'm attacking his knight twice, we just take on c6, and just like that, we are already ahead by an entire piece. I'm assuming his bishop has to take, but then once the bishop takes, my queen is just gonna take, and from here it's either, okay, guy's gone completely mad. He blocked with the knight, didn't even take back. So that's another piece. I'm now ahead by 2 pieces. And then he plays knight c5. Now, I think he thinks he's forking back the 2 pieces, but his king is already in a little mating net. Bishop to c6 check. Always ensure that you consider your checks first. He has to block with the knight. I mean, unless he's going to block with the queen. And now I'm trying to set up some checkmates. Like I was thinking about playing bishop e4 and then sacrificing on g6. That's definitely a rook. I'm trying to get more than just a rook though. Like what if I take on h7 and attack this rook? If I take on h7 and attack this rook, if he attacks my queen, there's queen to f8. Oh, my knight also guards the square. Let's play knight h7. Now, both of his rooks are under attack, and I'm sure you guys know what's happening here. Whenever you find a good move, just look for a better one. Because if both of the rooks are under attack, I'm still going to win material anyways. So he did play the rook f6 move. That's definitely a rook. But do I gain anything if I check on g8? Like, if he blocks with the rook, I take. If he blocks with the bishop, I take with check. And then I take here, and I'm just trying to go for a checkmate, to be honest. Let's check on g8. Like, I'm not seeing the checkmate. If he blocks with the rook, he loses the bishop. So he has to block with the bishop. Well, my opponent decided to resign. But more Kings Indian attack against 900 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 900. We're still going to be playing some King's Indian attack. It's a very, very simple opening. You just get the knight out first. And persons that you're playing against, they won't expect these types of plans. And then you play pawn to g3, you fianchet to the bishop, and your king is just already safe after like five moves. So he plays d5, we go bishop to g7 or g2, knight c6. Now we castle the king. So step one is out the way. Get your king to safety. Now we're going to be working on step two. Now keep in mind the pawn on d2, you don't usually push this pawn two squares. You push the pawn one square because the purpose of the pawn is to cover the e4 and the d4 square, especially since we may want to play moves like pawn to e4 in the future. So we need this pawn on d3 to guard the square. Now, again, this is something that you can play against anything, especially since you start with the white pieces. And the opponent decided to develop the bishop to d6. And from here, the idea is to play e4. Usually, you have to count. Don't just play e4 if you don't count. For example, I have one piece covering e4. He has two pieces covering e4. If I play e4 now, I'm just going to be losing material. So let's start by playing the move knight to d2. So that way, e4 becomes possible in the future. And a lot of times, you're not necessarily going to be developing your dark squared bishop too early, because, I could play bishop to g5, but then it will mean that I'm going to have to lose the dark squared bishop to a knight. So we're not going to be going for that. He plays queen to e7. Now we play pawn to e4. If he takes on e4, we could choose to take with the knight or the pawn, depending on what you like. Taking with the pawn is usually good if you have some level of chess understandings to know that, okay, his knight does the attacking role, my knight does the defensive role. So I don't want to have my pieces doing the defensive role. But if you're at a higher level, you can always just take with the pawn, guard your pawn, eventually you put your knight on c4, and you're doing perfectly fine. So he did take, and now I'm thinking if I takes, definitely a fine position. But because I want to keep more pieces on the board, keep the position a bit complex, I'm going to choose to take with the pawn. But again, if you choose to take with the knight, then it's totally fine. So the plan, get the fianchetto position, get your king castled, tried to play e4. My opponent decided to pull the knight back to d7. I guess he assumed that I was trying to fork. I wasn't trying to fork, by the way, because he was heavily covering the square. Now we're going to just continue with our development here. Knight c4 already is a good development move. Queen to e2 is also a good development move. Let's play the move queen to e2. Now, all of the move that I'm trying to play the thematic moves that you're always going to be playing regardless of the position. For example, a lot of times you're going to have a pawn on c3, preventing a knight from going to d4 or b4. But because I don't necessarily need to play pawn c3 right now, I'm just going to continue with knight c4. A lot of time, you are also going to have one of your knights on c4. And whenever you have a knight on c4, always be on the lookout for this move, pawn to b5, because it will be attacking your knight and it's going to be annoying. You put the knight on c4 and then you have to move it again. So moves like a4 is usually a good move just to prevent a pawn from going to b5. Okay, that's definitely an interesting move, knight e5. My opponent is trying to trade some of the pieces off the board, which is not bad. He's just trying to trade. But we already know that to take is a mistake. Like, I'm thinking of takes. I'm not seeing what I get from that, to be honest. So if I'm going to let him be the one to make the capture, if he takes on c4, it helps my queen. And if he takes on f3, I just take back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the move pawn to c3, which, again, it's a thematic move. Usually you want to ensure that you have a pawn on c3 so that way you're covering the d4 and the b4 square. Eventually you should be able to put one of your bishops on e3 or f4, and then you swing your rook over to d1, and again you have a very fine position. Bishop to d7 was played, and okay, now I'm thinking, I'm trying to make a little tactic work where if I take and then the knight takes and then I takes and then the bishop takes, I play f4. And then I'm trying to trap the bishop, but the bishop will always be able to get the c5 square. So the bishop is just not going to be getting trapped anytime soon. With that being said, let's just continue with our development. All our minor pieces are developed. The rook and the king are the only pieces on the back rank. And this is what I've been saying. It doesn't matter the opening that you're playing. It's very important that you guys get the just the general advice that I'm giving you guys about openings in general. So that way you're able to learn stuff from the video, even if you don't play the opening. And if you want to play the opening, you're able to even learn it more. My opponent plays bishop to c5, and he made his first major mistake at the 900 level. I mean, he wasn't playing too badly, but this is one of the main ways how people blunder at this level. I'm not going to say it's the beginner's level because he's 900, he's approaching 1,000, but I'm also not going to say it's intermediate. So it's between beginner and intermediate where they don't just put pieces on squares where you can capture it, or they don't just not see the opponent idea, but they make drawback mistake. They move their pieces away, forgetting what the role of the piece was doing. So now he moves the bishop to c5. Bishop no longer guards the e5 knight. I'm attacking the knight twice. He's only guarding it once. That's just a free knight. So just like that, we're winning the game. Then he took on e3. I mean, he's trading. Generally, you don't want to be trading when you're behind in material, but I want to trade. So let's take on e3. If he takes, I'm just going to be taking with the knight, and I'm fine. The only pieces that I have that is not necessarily doing anything are my rooks. So he traded again. Let's just take back. Remember, once you're ahead in material, you should welcome all the trades. You want to trade. And as we spoke about, they just always make these types of mistakes. It just looks like a natural move to play, but you have to remember, how does my move affect my position? The rook no longer guards the pawn on a7, bro. This is your second drawback mistake. So now we're just going to take on a7, and I'm just ahead by even more material. So up to b5 was played. Very important that we're looking on the opponent's last move. Just check the move. See how does that move points towards our half of the board. And that's how we notice that our rook is under attack. So there's a lot of different ways to defend against this. You know, there's pawn c4, hit the bishop. But because my rook is not doing anything and I want to trade, I'm just going to play the move rook to d1, just swinging my rook over on the open file. And I'm trying to trade the rooks off the board. Now he plays pawn c6. He is guarding his pawn through, well, he's basically guarding the pawn with the queen, but there's another very nice tactical shot that I have here. Now, it may not work based on what he does, but I want you guys to notice how his queen is unprotected. And because the queen is unprotected, I'm trying to take on c6. And the reason why I'm not able to take on c6 is because of this bishop. So what I'm going to do to set this up is I'm first going to play the move pawn c4. And this is basically a removing the guard tactic. I'm trying to force his bishop away. And then once the bishop moves away, then I'm going to try to set up the idea of taking on c6. Okay, but then what was that, bro? Like, that was just bad. Like, not only did he hang his bishop, he also hung the rook. So that's crazy. There's nothing to say here. Let's just take the rook. I have two pieces on the rook. Let's just take the rook, and I'm attacking his queen. So he has to move the queen, and then after moving the queen, I'm gonna take the bishop. The guy just decided to lose the entire game. Okay, he plays queen to g5. Now he's just dead lost. I'm trying to set up some checkmates. That's a free bishop. But if I take his bishop, he takes my knight. So we're going to be playing what is called an in-between move here, where I play the move pawn to f4, hit the queen, and I'm guarding my knight. So I'm basically forcing away the queen. I'm forcing the queen to move. And then once the queen moves away, seeing that my knight is guarded, I'm just going to be taking the bishop for free. And I'm already ahead by 9 points, by the way. And my king is completely safe. So the queen went back to f6. Let's take the bishop on b5. And this is GG's. I mean, he took back. This is the only piece that is not in the game. Let's just get the rook in the game. The whole idea is to get both of my rooks on his seventh rank. Always remember the saying, rooks on the seventh is in heaven. Now, I have both of my rooks on the seventh rank, and I also have my queen on the seventh rank. So this should lead to at least checkmate, or I'm going to win his queen and his rook. On g5, the f7 pawn is the target. I'm attacking f7 one, two, three times. He's guarding f7 one, two, three times. I could takes, and if rook takes, I takes, and it's just completely winning. I mean, I'm also thinking of just playing knight g4 to hit the queen, to be honest. But then the queen goes to g6. Let's just take on f7 here and win the game. Once he takes, I'm just going to take again. His queen is under attack. I think he kind of has to sack the queen. Otherwise, I'm just going to take on b7 and deliver some checkmate. So it's just game over at this point. Okay, he did not move the queen. He decided to pull the queen back to d1. And I have to be careful because there are some checking possibilities, especially since I'm planning on taking on b7. I have to ensure that this check will not lead to any forced draw. So I don't want to allow that. That's going to give him too many counterplay. So let's just be patient. Let's play the move rook to d7 first. So that way, when you play like this, it doesn't give the opponent any hope. So now he doesn't even have any hope that he could try to draw the game. Maybe he could try queen to c8, but that's when I would take queen to f6. From here, it's just checkmate in two moves. The queen no longer guard the background. So that's actually another drawback mistake where once I play the move queen to b8 check, the king has nowhere to move. Oh, actually, never mind. I thought he had to block this way, but he is able to block this way. So that's actually not a checkmate. But we are able to win his queen because the queen and the king is on the same line. We're going to play the move rook to d1. And this just wins the queen. So it's going to be leading to a checkmate. So let's just take here. And the king has to move. I'm not necessarily, well, okay, let's try to find a mate. And hopefully you found the mate. So the checkmate is check. The king has to go back. Then we check. The king has to go there. Then we mate. So this is checkmate in three moves. The king could also go to h8 here, but I'd still play queen f7. And once the king move, that's just a checkmate. But more kings Indian attack against 1,000 players. Stick around. Your opponent is now 1,000. We're still playing the opening that you could play against anything. Like, it doesn't matter what they play next. We're still going to play g3. Really doesn't matter. I'm going to play bishop to g2. He's developing his pieces. And again, ensure that when you're playing this line, especially if you're playing bullet, you're on the lookout for some bishop h3 tricks. Apart from that, I'm just going to castle on the next move. And then once we get step one out the way, the good thing about this line is you'll never ever have to worry about king safety. So you don't have to worry about king safety. That's one. Two, it's always going to be the first time your opponent seeing these moves. And three, it's actually very, very aggressive, which is why it's called the King's Indian attack. So my opponent is playing very principled, actually. He's developing his bishop. He's playing pawn to e6. Let's play pawn to d3. This is the whole idea. We're going to play knight d2, and then we're going to try to play e4. So pawn c5 was played. Let's just play knight d2. Same idea. And remember, this bishop does not necessarily have to move just yet. Just focus on the development of the other pieces, and eventually your bishop is going to find a very nice square. For example, sometimes it goes to e3. Sometimes you don't move the bishop. And then when it's time for you to move the bishop, it's like a very nice tactic or a sacrifice that you can play. Knight c6 was played. Usually, when you see knight c6, you don't necessarily have to play c3 now, but c3 is just a very good universal move. It prevents the knights from ever coming in, and if you have to, you can play d4. The whole idea is not to play d4 though; it's to play e4. And for example, he has three pieces on the e4 square. I only have two pieces on the e4 square. So playing a move like c3 could give my queen access to the c2 square, so that way I'm able to play e4. And if the bishop goes on d6, there's usually a lot of times where you could catch your opponent into some very nice forks with e4, and then once the bishop move, you play e5, and he's basically just forked. So he did play bishop to d6. I mean, I'm not assuming he's going to be falling for it, but he is 1,000. All I need to do in this position is to ensure that I protect the e4 square and ensure that the e5 square will be protected once I play pawn to e5. So let's just play rook to e1 here. The plan is actually to play e4, e5. This is not no hope chess type of business though. Like if he falls for it, then he falls for it. If he doesn't, the idea was to play e4 anyways. And just to let you guys know, queen to e1 is also a move that you could play. It's a more advanced move. The whole idea of putting the queen on e1 is so that way you keep the rook on f1 and then you play f4 and e4 in the future and attack on the king side. But rook to e1 is just very, very thematic. And it looks like my opponent did fall for the tactic. He plays h5 and we're just winning now. We're just winning. Like this is called a fork, by the way. But in order to get the fork, the whole idea is called marching pawns. So we're basically going to be marching the pawn from e2 to e5. So he's covering the square three times. I'm also covering the square three times. So once we play the move pawn to e4, oh, I think okay, now I get why they play queen to e1. Actually get why they play queen to e1. Because the reason why they play queen to e1 is so that way bishop to g4 is not possible. So I'm actually not winning any material because he's able to play bishop to g4 and pin my knight. So that's something that I want you guys to keep in mind. So I completely messed the idea. I think the whole idea was to keep the rook on the f1 square, but it was so that way the knight protects the e5 square. So once the bishop goes to g4, I can't play e5. Even though it looks like a fork, the knight is just going to take on e5, and then my knight is not going to be able to take. So that was just a very nice idea. Now I have to try to do the fork, which my opponent is not going to allow because he basically sees what's coming. So there's a pin here, nevertheless, and I am going to try to just get my queen out of the pin and play the move queen b3, attacking his unprotected pawn on b7, and I am still threatening the fork. So you could still see I'm winning, but it would have been way better to put the queen on e1 instead of putting the rook on e1. So hopefully you guys learned that. And then he took on f3, which, I mean, I'm definitely going to call it a mistake. I mean, no need to be giving up the bishop for the knight this early. Let's just take back on f3. I'm still threatening the fork. I'm still threatening the unprotected pawn. And notice how I haven't moved the bishop, but no, g5 is just a nice square for the bishop. He's not even able to play h6 and chase away my bishop. Once I hit him with bishop g5, rook to d1 is coming, and all my pieces are going to be actively playing a role in the game. So queen to c7 was played. Very nice move. He's basically saying e5 is not good. But I'm still thinking of playing e5. Remember that quote that I learned from Sam Shankland? It basically says, if you create a threat and the opponent plays a move to prevent the threat, always ask yourself, what happens if I play it anyway? So I'm not necessarily gonna play e5, but I still have to ask what happens if I do. So if e5, the knight takes, my knight takes, his bishop takes, and now I have two pieces that is able to attack his pawn on b7. And then I'm thinking of playing the move queen takes b7, attacking the unprotected rook, and my queen is also attacking his queen. So I basically get back the pawn. If his queen takes, then I'm going to just take the queen, check the king, and I may be winning some material. But once I take with the queen, he's not necessarily forced to take my queen. He could just castle his king. And I don't want to be playing any hope chess in this position. So let's just develop the bishop to g5. Let's at least complete our development first. So that way we could say, okay, now we can play a move like pawn e5. Knight to g4 was played. That's a very interesting move. I'm not going to lie. And there's actually a trick here that my opponent could do. Like, I mean, obviously, I'm thinking about h3. We don't allow pieces on our half of the board. But if I do play h3, I'm thinking of knight takes f2. And then if I takes the knight, there's bishop takes g3. And once I move the king, he takes on e1. So that's a nice idea. No need to rush anything though. Like my a1 rook is the only piece that is not doing anything. Let's just bring the rook to d1. And as I said before, once you play the King's Indian attack, you really don't have to worry about someone attacking your king because your bishop is fianchetted, and the only way for them to attack your king is to trade off your fianchetted bishop. In this position, my opponent don't even have a light squared bishop. Okay, the king is now castled. Castling the king with this pawn on h5 is definitely suspicious. Now, I could say my queen isn't doing anything here anymore. Thinking of putting my queen on c2 with some ideas of putting a knight on g5, threatening some checkmate. I'm also thinking of just doubling up on the d file. Because now that I look on the position, the e rook is okay. I'm not going to say it's not doing anything, but it is pointing towards its own pawn. So with that being said, I'm thinking of playing either rook to d2 or rook to e2. They both comes with the same idea of doubling up the rook. So let's go with that idea. Let's go rook to d2. I'm trying to play rook to d1 and start attacking this bishop. And the good thing about my position, my bishop on g5 is doing a very nice role, preventing his rook from going to d8. So I'm assuming he's going to play something like bishop to e7, trying to trade off the bishops. Knight e5 was played instead. If I take his knight takes, I'm basically helping his knight. And we already know that to take is a mistake, so no need to even think about that. The knight doesn't really have other forward moves, so let's just continue with the plan of playing rook to d1. Now I have two pieces attacking his bishop on d6. He only has one piece guarding the bishop. Pawn c4 is a nice move, I'm not gonna lie, because it attacks my queen. My queen is forced to move, and I think the knight wants to get access to this d3 square. But I'm actually gonna put my queen on a4, so that way, if he moves away the knight, he will be leaving his pawn on c4 unprotected. So I'm still attacking his bishop, by the way. Now he decides to pull the bishop back to e7, and if I take the bishop, I'm assuming he's going to take with the knight or the queen. It doesn't really matter. I'm not necessarily going to be getting anything from this trade. And we already know that we should only be trading if it helps our position. Unless I'm able to win a pawn, let's say I take this bishop, he takes with the knight, and then I take this knight, his queen takes my knight, and then there's nothing guarding this pawn and I'm able to take. But if I take the bishop and he decides to take with the queen, me taking the knight, he's just going to take back and guard the pawn. But then I'm able to play f4. Oh, but then he checks on c5 before he moves the knight. So let's just pull the bishop back to f4. Let's pin his knight. The opponent also only has a minute on his clock, so I'm assuming he's not going to be playing all the most accurate moves in this position. But I currently have two pieces attacking his knight. He has two pieces guarding the knight, so the knight is currently safe in this position, but he has to be careful. Knight takes f3, that's a good move. It comes with check, so his queen is not hanging. So let's just take back on f3. E5 attacks the bishop. I'm thinking of playing rook to d7 to counter attack the queen. And then once the queen move, I sack my bishop on e5. And then once the knight takes, I take his bishop. But the knight will be attacking my bishop on f3. And since my bishop is attacking this unprotected pawn, I'm just going to pull my bishop back to e3. Now he has two unprotected pawns that he has to cater to. So I believe I am winning material in this position. Okay, there's this feature on chess.com where you could add time to the opponent's clock. And since we're still in the opening, I mean, not sure why he's playing this slow. I'm going to add around 2 minutes to his clock. So now he has 2 minutes. So at least he could start thinking about his moves. So rook to d1 was played. I mean, that's a free pawn. That's a free pawn. I'm going to choose to take this free pawn, seeing that way it pins his knight. And then eventually I should be able to take this free pawn. So he's trading rooks. Let's just take back. I'm the one who is ahead in material, so I don't mind trading pieces off the board. There's two pawns in his position that is now hanging, by the way. It may look as if the knight is guarding the pawn on a7, but the knight is actually pinned. So if my bishop was to take on a7, he will not be able to take back. For example, if he plays g6, I may take on a7, winning a pawn. So he decided to play a6. Looks like he's reading my mind, but he did not protect his h5 pawn. So let's just take on h5. Now I have some good pressure on his f7 pawn. I'm attacking f7 twice. He's also guarding f7 twice. So I'm not winning f7 right now, but he is forced to keep his rook on the f8 square. I'm not going to be giving this guy any more time. I'm not sure why he's playing this slow. He's using up his time though. Pawn to b4 attacks my queen. I just need to move the queen. I'm going to choose to move the queen forward to d5, controlling the file. The rook is still not able to move because he's going to be losing this pawn. And then he plays pawn to g6. Pawn g6 was actually a move that I was expecting, but keep in mind, because my queen is on the same diagonal as his king, the pawn on f7 is actually pinned, and pinned pieces does not protect. So I am actually able to take on g3, capturing yet another pawn. The rook is still not able to move because he's going to be getting checkmated, and I am actively thinking about some removing the guard tactic to win this game. For example, if I play bishop to h6, he's going to be forced to move the rook. And then once he moves the rook, I'll take. So he decided to pull the knight back to d8, which means the knight guards the f7 square, but he's still not able to take on g6. So let's just continue with the plan. Let's play the move bishop to h6. Let's attack the rook. But based on how this guy's playing, he's not going to make a move. With that being said, we're going to be playing more King's Indian attack against 1100 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1100. Let's go knight f3. He immediately played d6, and we're going to be playing pawn g3. Now, it looks as if my opponent is playing either a Pirc or a modern or a King's Indian. So it's basically going to be a King's Indian defense versus a King's Indian attack. Let's play bishop to g7. He fianchetted his bishop. Now I'll simply castle my king. And then after knight to f6, this is the king's Indian that my opponent is playing. And if you look on the position, it's very, very symmetrical because even though he has this pawn on d6, I'm also going to play the move pawn to d3. But let's see if he's just going to copy all the moves that I play. Let's play e4. That's the plan. Knight d2 is also the plan. Pawn c3, queen e2. Those are the main ideas. But he immediately decided to play b6, and he has to be careful. He is at risk of losing a pawn in this position because the moment he plays pawn to b6, notice how my bishop is now seeing his rook, but my pawn is in the way. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to play the move pawn to e5, attacking his knight. And if he takes my pawn and I take back on e5, my bishop attacks the rook. And the only way for him to not lose the rook is to play pawn c6. And I'm going to be ahead by a pawn. So the best move for black in this position is to not take the pawn and just decide to find a good square for his knight. So he decided to put the knight on g4, but again, my bishop is on the same line as the rook. I am going to be doing some discovered attack, and I think I'm already winning if I'm not wrong. Like, first, I'm going to take on d6, and we could say we're temporarily ahead by a pawn. But his problem is if any time he decides to try to take back on d6, I'm just going to move my knight, which is what he did. And yeah, he's about to lose material. Like b6 just weakens the position too much for him. So here's what is about to happen. This is called a discovered attack. This is called an X-ray. My bishop sees through the knight. But once I move my knight out the way to e5, my knight and my queen attacks his knight. But my bishop also attacks his rook. There's actually no way for him to guard the rook. So it's actually best for him to just take my knight. Well, this is also something that I need you guys to keep in mind. You have to ensure that you're doing math while you're playing chess. If he had simply taken my knight and I take his rook, he would have only lost 2 points because my knight is 3 and his rook is 5. But he decided to play pawn to d5 and save the rook. Now, once I take on g4, I'm just ahead by an entire 3 points. Pawn to f5 attacks the knight. I mean, I am forced to put the knight somewhere. I'm thinking of just playing knight to h6 check, and then once the king moves, I just continue with my development. Otherwise, I'm going to have to pull my knight to e3, attacking the pawn, but then he's just going to guard it. So let's play knight to h6 check. It's very important that we always start by looking on our most forcing moves first. Now, he is going to be forced to move his king. I mean, if he wants to trade and give me this very strong bishop, then that's on him. I am expecting king h1 here. Now, once he moves his king, I'm going to play this move, pawn to c4. And what I'm basically doing is I'm now applying pressure to his weak pawn on d5. It is still pp on the pp. The d pawn is pinned. No, his bishop is now pinned. So once I play knight c3, I am still applying pressure to the pinned pawn because if any time he tries to move the pawn, I'm going to take his bishop and his rook will follow. I'm expecting something like pawn to e6, which is a fine move. It's a decent move. He won't lose any material playing pawn to d6. So he did play pawn e6. The pawn is unprotected though, so let's just play the move rook to e1. Now I'm attacking the unprotected pawn. And I mean, he has to be careful how he defends the pawn. For example, this rook is protecting the f7 square. So if he moves the rook over to e8, guarding the pawn, I'm going to play the move knight to f7, and that's going to be forking his queen and his king. So queen to f6 was played. Not a bad square for the queen. In fact, that's a good move because I'm at threat of losing material. My knight is the only defender of my bishop is the only defender of my knight. If he plays pawn to g5, my knight is just going to be trapped. So even though the queen no longer guards this pawn, I have to ensure that I do not lose my knight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be playing a prophylactic move, pawn to h4. And a prophylactic move basically means you see the move that the opponent is trying to do, you anticipate that move, and then you prevent that move. Oh, that's such a bad move. I mean, he's attacking my knight, but not only did he trap his own queen, he also blundered his bishop. Now, that is a free bishop, But there's actually a move that traps the queen here. Like, if you notice, the queen does not have a lot of squares. The only square that the queen has is e7 and back to d8, which means once I play the move bishop to g5 and this move h4, it was not only a defensive move, I was also ensuring that my bishop gets to the g5 square. Now the game is just over. Like, I'm just going to take the queen and win the queen. Okay, he puts the queen on e5. He's basically saying, I'm gonna lose the queen, but I'm gonna be capturing your rook. But no, I'm just gonna take the queen because if he takes my rook, I take his bishop, and his rook is trapped. So now he takes my pawn. Now I take his rook, and okay, it's now just GG's. He's attacking my rook. Let's just move the rook. I'm ahead by 11 points. So now I'm just thinking about all the ways to just end this game. Knight d7 was played. It does mean that my bishop is under attack. Before I move the bishop, let's play pawn to d4. I want him to take my bishop so that way I take his knight because we're trying to trade as much pieces off the board. Well, he decided to just sacrifice the bishop. So let's just take. And I guess he's just going to be taking my bishop on the next move. But I'm trying to, well, the opponent decided to resign. But more King's Indian attack against 1,200 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,200. Let's go knight to f3. Knight f6, we play g3. So we're playing the King's Indian attack. He's playing the King's Indian defense. This is going to be a very interesting game because this is basically the King's Indian attack versus the King's Indian defense. It's the same plans, except white has one extra move. So let's play pawn to d3 here. Let's see if he knows what he's doing. And then he plays pawn to d5. So basically, he's trying to prevent me from playing e4, which is usually not possible. Let's just continue with our plan. Knight d2, pawn c3, pawn e4. Knowing the setup, knowing where the pieces belong, will make it way easier for us to play the Kia. So this is basically the Kia versus the kid. Knight c6 was played. Now we thrust our pawn to the e4 square. And the good thing about our position is we're never going to be worried about a knight going to d4 or b4. For example, in a position like this where the bishop is pinning my knight to my queen, I'm just going to play the move pawn to c3. So there's no applying pressure to the pinned knight in this position. Queen to d7 was played, and being a King's Indian attack or a King's Indian defense player, you should know what to do. Whenever you see a battery lining up towards h3, you should ensure that once the guy plays bishop h3, you're able to play bishop h1. In order for us to do that, we must move this rook out the way because we don't want to play bishop h1 and lose the rook. Pawn to e5 was played. It's a decent move. There is a pin happening here, and usually we want to just move our queen out the pin, especially this c2 square. Usually the queen goes to e2 or c2 in these types of position. Because of this pin on my knight, I'm going to break the pin by playing queen c2. I'm also thinking of moves like taking on d5 and taking on e5. He decides to play bishop to h3 though, so my first instinct is to just pull the bishop back to h1. But am I able to win a pawn? That's my second instinct. So, for example, if I take on d5 and he takes on g2, I take and I'm attacking the queen. Now, there is queen to h3. And if he's able to play queen to h3, I could be getting mated. If I takes, he takes, I takes, and then queen takes, then I'm not able to win the pawn. With that being said, let's just pull the bishop back to h1. And taking on d5 could now be a threat. So I'm expecting something like either rook to e8 or him taking on e4, maybe d4. But d4 is not good here. And that's the move that he played. But as I said, d4 is not really good. Now, slightly conflicted in what move to play because he moves the pawn to d5, c4 is no longer guarded, and that usually always go to the c4 square. So I'm immediately thinking of knight c4 to apply pressure to e5. I'm thinking of just taking on d4, then knight c4, but I'm not really seeing exactly what I get. So let's play the more aggressive knight c4. I have two attackers. He has one defender. He has to play something like rook to e8 to guard e5, and then I may take on d4. I may also just keep the tension between the pawns and then play something like b4, which he did play rook to e8, and I like the idea of playing b4 here. But if I play b4 and he takes and I play b5, there is knight d4 and my queen is going to be under attack. So that's definitely a bit reckless. If I takes and he takes with the knight and then I takes and he takes with the pawn, then my d3 pawn is not going to be as weak anymore. And one thing I want you guys to remember is whenever your knight is on c4, they want to play pawn to b5 to attack the knight. So if I play pawn a4 to prevent b5, that's also not bad. So, but let's just take on d4 here. He decided to take with the pawn, which is interesting because my knight is now playing the role of the attacker. His knight is now playing the role of the defender. We're still trying to ensure that b5 is not too threatening. I'm thinking of playing a4. It definitely allows his knight access to the d2, the b4 square though. So I'm going to play the move bishop to d4 to prevent his knight from going here. If he plays b5, I may just pull my knight back to a3 and attack the b pawn, followed by some moves like rook c1 and then target his knight, hit this pawn. So b5 is in fact creating a lot of weaknesses in his position. With that being said, I'm actually thinking of playing b4 now. So he did play b5. So here's how I'm going to navigate this. I'm going to pull the knight to a3. The knight is on the edge of the board, but his pawn on b7 is no longer guarding the knight. So I am expecting a move like pawn a6, just a natural defending move, guarding the pawn. But then I bring my last piece into the attack. And if he moves the knight, he could be losing his c7 pawn. But then he decided to play a4. I mean, he was playing very well, to be honest. I guess he wants to play knight b4, but that's just a free pawn. If knight b4, I just take the knight, and even if he choose to take my knight, I just pull the bishop back. So that's definitely a pawn. You should have at least played a6 to guard it, bro. But I think rook to c1 would have also lost a pawn, which means that b5 move, even though b5 is an idea to chase away the knight, you have to ensure that you time it correctly. So he did play knight b4, hits the queen, hits this. Queen to c4, there's bishop e6. So let's just get rid of the knight. If he takes my knight, then okay, his d4 pawn is hanging if he takes the bishop. So he basically has to not take the bishop, choose to take the knight. But then even if he takes the knight, I'm not going to pull my bishop back to d2. I'm just going to put my bishop on c5. So queen to b5, as we said, that's a free pawn. Not yet though. My bishop is under attack. So let's play the move bishop to c5. Imagine I have two pieces attacking the pawn. He has zero pieces guarding the pawn, and I'm already ahead by a pawn. He's about to be behind by two pawns. So knight back to d7 was played. He's guarding the pawn once. If I takes, his queen is gonna take. So we have to take with the bishop. But again, we're just ahead by two pawns. If he trades the bishop, I take it, the queen. His c7 pawn is also hanging. And I want you guys to notice how this bishop on h2 is just not doing anything. And the only way for him to bring it back in the game is just to waste a move and pull it back, which is why the whole idea of rook e1, bishop h1 is so important. Okay, he did not trade. He puts the knight back on f6. I mean, that's a pawn, but it seems a bit too risky. Let me just use the time to get all my pieces in the game. Let me just put this rook on this file. That's a dead pawn, by the way. So even if he tries to guard it, eventually I should be able to be winning that pawn. So we're definitely not in any rush. Okay, so he decided to finally defend the pawn. Now, the question is, how do we continue with our attack? How do we convert this position into a win? I'm thinking of getting my knight to this d4 square, so that way my knight is able to get to this c6 square. Now, I like the idea of just pulling my bishop back to c3, so that way it applies some pressure to his pawn, which means once I hit him with knight to d4, he has to be careful where he puts the queen. Otherwise, he's just going to be losing this pawn. Pawn c5 could definitely be a move trying to prevent this, but as I said, that's just a dead pawn. Like, it's just isolated. I have two pieces on the file. I don't think that pawn is going to be surviving. Okay, he did play pawn to c5. My plan from here before we target this is to fix this weakness. Both of these pawns are weak, so I'm going to play pawn to a4 to hit the queen, forcing the queen to move. This what I'm trying to do is basically a removing the guard tactic, by the way. Like if he puts the queen somewhere where he doesn't guard this pawn, then my bishop would have been able to take, which is why he puts the bishop here. I'm thinking of knight g5 to hit this bishop. I'm also thinking of just knight e5. But let's play knight to g5. Let's attack the bishop. And I mean, I could eventually get the bishop here if he's not careful. Pawn to e5 is also an idea to hit the knight. And the good thing is, his knight will not be able to get to the d5 square because my light squared bishop is going to be super active on this diagonal. He decided to play rook to d6, completely missed the fact that I'm even attacking the bishop. So let's just take the bishop off the board. I mean, this guy played really well though. Like, I'm happy that you guys are able to see the differences between these strengths. It's like it's just more about who is blundering less, basically. Now he plays pawn to h5, and now I have another nice tactic because of my bishop on h1. And I want you guys to notice how his rook is on the same diagonal as my bishop. And my bishop x-rays his rook. My pawn on e4 is the only piece that prevents me from attacking his rook. So once I play pawn to e5, this is called a discovered attack, where the bishop attacks the rook, my pawn attacks the knight. So he is forced to lose more material. And, I guess he's just not seeing the bishop because it's all the way on h1, but that's another free piece, bro. Like, it's crazy when, and this is why all I want you guys to do is just not blunder, because everybody nowadays is not losing in the opening. Like, don't expect to win the game in the opening. And that's what I had to be drilling in my student's head. He finally resigned, but more King's Indian attack against 1,300 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,300. Let's go knight f3. This is called the King's Indian attack, or the Kia. D5, we play G3. Again, it doesn't matter what they play. Just do the same setup. This opening could play against anything. So pawn C5, bishop G2, still doesn't matter. We're going to be castling our king on the next move. Let's castle the king. And now he plays E5. So my opponent has a very big center. But one thing to keep in mind is whenever you see e5, they want to play e4 and attack your knight. So we play the move pawn to d3, preventing them from playing pawn to e4. And then from here, we're just going to continue with knight d2, pawn e4. And I'm not sure if you guys are able to see what I'm seeing, but I'm actually playing the King's Indian defense with the white pieces, and it looks as if black has the white pieces. So it's the King's Indian attack. It's the King's Indian defense, but I get to play the first move, which means it's even more deadlier. But let's continue. Let's go knight d7. Well, knight d2, followed by pawn e4. Especially if he plays pawn to d4 and close the position, then we're actually playing the King's Indian defense with white up a tempo. So knight to f6, we play pawn to e4. If they take, we just take back, and then pawn c3 prevents the knight from coming to d4. Otherwise, if they play pawn to d4, which he did, now we play the move knight c4, and I'm already attacking this bishop. Now, usually what they do in the King's Indian defense is they pull the bishop back, but it's crazy how it's after he makes a move, I'm going to be able to play a4, and his king is not even castled as yet. So bishop back to c7, we play a4. So again, if you play the Pirk or the King's Indian and those are your favorite opening, consider playing the same thing with the white pieces, and you're literally going to be just going around playing the same line. So the king castle, the plan in the King's Indian is to play pawn to f4. So that's what I'm trying to do here. Bishop to d2 is usually a move to play as well, but knight to h4 followed by knight to f5 is definitely the usual idea. Let's just play knight to h4. So two ideas. We could play pawn to f4. We could also play the move knight to f5. It all depends on what black plays. Now he plays h6. The purpose of h6 is to prevent my bishop from going to g5. Wasn't planning on putting a bishop on g5. I want to play pawn to f4, but if I play f4, there's takes, my knight is going to be unprotected, and there's going to be some sacrificial ideas on e4. So let's delay the idea of f4 right now. Knight f5 will always be an idea, by the way, but I'm also going to delay the idea of doing that. And I'll simply just play bishop to d2 to develop my bishop. My next move is to play moves like queen to e1. So that way, when I play f4, I'm no longer losing my knight, basically. So bishop e6 applies some pressure to my knight. Usually when they take, we're just going to be taking with the b pawn. So pawn to b6 is definitely a nice move here. And if he takes on c4, then he's not going to have any pieces to take my knight if it goes to the f5 score. So that's not necessarily a good plan for him. We move to d7. He's trying to, okay, the queen is no longer on the same diagonal as my knight. It looks like he's trying to play bishop to h3, but I don't care because I'm trying to put something on the f5 square anyways. So let's just play the move pawn to f4. No, because after takes, there's no knight sacrifices because I'm not going to be losing my knight. He took on f4. Usually we always want to take back with the pawn. We have a lot of control over these squares. I mean, pawn to e5 could be coming, pawn to f5 could be coming. Usually, you don't really want to push any of these pawns until you're 100% sure that what you're doing is working. So, bishop h3 was played. Now, off the top of my head, I'm thinking of just playing queen to f3, forcing him to take. And then once my queen takes, my queen is on the same line as the king. And then I'm going to be playing moves like knight to f5. So let's go with the idea of queen to h3. I have two pieces attacking his bishop. So he has to take. I'm going to take, put my queen on the same line as his king. And then I'm going to play. Another important thing that you guys need to keep in mind is king h1 followed by rook to g1 also starts the attack. He pulls the bishop back to g4. I wasn't expecting that move, to be honest. And if I put my queen on g3, the queen is on the same line as his bishop. So let's just put the queen on f2 here. I would still like to play king to h1 followed by rook to g1 and start my attack this way. So pawn to a6 was played. He wants to play pawn to a5. Another important idea for you guys to learn when you're playing these types of setup. This is basically the King's Indian defense with the white pieces up a tempo. Because they want to play pawn to b5, we play the move pawn to a5 ourselves. No, he's never going to be able to play pawn to b5 because we're going to be doing the illegal move. And now our knight is just permanently placed on the c4 square. So rook to e8 was played, not bad. He's putting his rook on some open files. It's going to be a slow build-up. Like I want to play f5, but I need my knight on the f5 square. So let's continue with our slow plan. Let's go king to h1. The next move is to play rook to g1. And then I'm going to have this file pointing towards his king. Okay, the queen moves to e7. Not sure why. Not sure what that is doing. Now I'm thinking of playing e5 to hit the knight because the knight is not able to go here, but the knight is still able to go here. What I would like to play though is queen to g3. But if I play queen g3, I'm assuming he's going to move his bishop. But then once I play queen g3, I'm putting my queen on the same file as the king. And I'm going to be following up with playing the move rook to g1, putting my rook on the same line as the king. So there's some very nice attack brewing. Okay, the bishop went back to d8, so he's definitely planning on ganging up on my knight on h4. Something will happen to my knight on h4. I'm thinking of playing e5 to attack the knight. I'm assuming he's going to play knight h4 to attack my queen, and then once I take, he's going to take. So let's just pull our bishop back to e1, guarding the knight first. Then I'm threatening to play pawn to e5. You know, we have to be very, very careful. It's crucial that we look on the opponent's last move and, just try to see what the opponent is trying to do. Now he plays queen to e6 because if I attack the knight goes to h5 and his bishop is guarded. With that being said, I'm going to play the move pawn to f5 and attack his queen. The bad thing is I'm no longer able to play knight to f5, but his bishop could be trapped. Like he could be losing his bishop if he's not 100% careful about his next move. Because the knight is the only defender of this bishop. So if he does not prevent me from playing a move like pawn to e5, for example, queen e7, then I'm going to play pawn e5. And it's going to be a removing the guard tactic. And he will be losing his bishop. Otherwise, I'm going to play the move rook to g1. And yeah, he basically found the move. So if I play here, it's just counting. He has three pieces on the square. So once the knight takes, I'm not going to be gaining anything. So let's just play rook to g1. There's something coming up here. Okay, bishop to c7. That was a good move, not gonna lie. He's attacking my queen. I'm forced to move my queen. And I'm not able to play bishop to f3 or bishop to h3 was what I wanted to play. But because he's attacking the queen, let's just move the queen out the way. But this bishop, I think he's based on the position, he has to lose the bishop. Like the bishop just has nowhere to go. Knight to h5, interesting move. My knight is guarded. I'm assuming he's trying to put his knight on the f4 square. Okay, let's talk. Let's talk. If I pull my bishop back to f1, guarding my knight, attacking his bishop, how does he not lose the bishop? Unless he pulls the knight back to f6, but that's basically what I wanted. Now I'm going to put the queen back on g2 with ideas of checkmating him on g7. Queen to g5, I'm not going to lie, this guy's defending like his life is on the line. But okay, he puts his queen on the same file as my rook. We have to be careful because there's a lot of pieces pointing towards my king. But if I play pawn to h3 and he checks on g3, I take the knight, he takes the rook, I take the bishop. I'm still attacking his bishop. He pulls the bishop back. I takes, he takes, and I'm better, but I'm trying to win the queen outright. What if I play bishop to d2, attacking the queen? Bishop d2 hits the queen, knight to f4, and then only after knight f4, that's when I play pawn to h3. Let's go with that idea. Let's go bishop to d2, hit the queen. Now, there is also bishop to f4, but my whole idea is to play pawn to h3. Once I'm able to play pawn to h3, it's basically going to be meaning he's losing his bishop. And if he moves his queen away, then he's still losing his bishop. So he pulls the queen back. Now we take the bishop and we're just winning the game. My opponent is playing my opponent was playing some very good defensive moves, but now it's just over. We play pawn g6. Now, I can confirm that I'm just winning. He's also pushing pawns on the side that his king is on. He moves the pawn, which means h6 is now unprotected. Okay, let's just take the free pawn. No need to rush anything. That's just a pawn. I'm also trying to get my bishop back to g5 and attack the queen. I'm trying to get this bishop in the game. This rook on a1 is begging to join the game or to join the attack because it is helping to guard a5. But I'm going to move the bishop to e2, then swing my rook to g1, and then every single piece is going to be active. Okay, he pulls the knight back to g7. And in this position, the queen is gone. Once I play bishop to g5, where exactly is he going to put the queen that does not immediately loses the queen? But the opponent has no time on the clock. So with that being said, we are going to be playing more kings in the... Well, his time is not running out. Let's play here and then take the knight. And then we take here against 1,400 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,400. Let's play knight to f3. D5, we play g3. Our next move is bishop g7, and we're just going to be castling the king. So knight c6, we go bishop to g2. Knight f6, we castle the king. Step one is out the way. Now it's time for step two. And step two has a lot to do with playing moves like d3, knight d2, try to play e4, and eventually our attack comes in. Bishop to e6 has to be bad. Not sure why he didn't put the bishop on f5. I guess he wants to play queen d7 and bishop h3, but we know how to deal with that threat. So let's just play pawn d3. Let's just continue with our idea. And now once the queen goes to d7, whenever you see them trying to play this bishop h3 move, there's two ways to deal with it. One way is to play rook e1, meet bishop h3 with bishop h1. The more aggressive way, if it's available, is to play knight to g5, which attacks the bishop on e6, and we're also covering the e6 square ourselves. So he decided to just castle, which means we're not necessarily in any rush to take the bishop. Usually it's best to wait until they attack the knight, then we take the bishop. Unless he's trying to play bishop to f5 and then, okay, he's not trying to play bishop to f5, he will be blundering the pawn. So let's just play pawn c3 here. Again, it's just a thematic move, especially if they castle on the queen side. We're now able to play moves like b4 and b5, and we're able to start an attack on their queen side. So it's a very, very flexible system to play. So now that he plays h6, that's when I'm going to be taking on e6. The queen and the king is on the same diagonal, by the way. So I'm always on the lookout for bishop h3. It may not work though. So let's just continue with our regular moves. Let's go knight to d2. The rook is on the same line as the queen, by the way. So we have to be very careful when it comes to playing a move like e4. I mean, e4 could still be good, but we just have to be careful. I would personally prefer to play moves like b4 and focus on my queen side attack instead of playing e4 here. And now he plays g5. Decent move. He's trying to fianchetto his bishop. He's trying to finish his development. But we're going to start our attack. Let's play pawn to b4. I want to play moves like knight b3 to c5. I want to get my queen over there. I want to get my rook over there. Like, there's going to be a lot of pieces that joins the attack here, especially since my bishop on g2, it's just so active, pointing towards b7. And then he plays g4. Okay, now I'm not sure what my opponent is doing. I thought he wanted to develop the bishop. G4 doesn't do anything. Let's continue with our plan. We're going to play the move knight b3 here. We're just trying to put as much pieces as close as possible to his king. And the good thing is, once I play this move pawn to b5, the knight is not going to a5. So he may be forced to pull his knight back to b8 here. Okay, he plays pawn to b6. That's not how you want to defend when you're defending, guys. Like, remember to not push pawns on the side that your king is on, because now it becomes a bit more easier for me to carry out my attack. Basically, all I need to do is play a4, a5. His pawn on b6 is basically giving me a hook. So now once I play a4, eventually once I play a5, my rook is going to get a free open file. And that's because he's pushing pawns on the side that his king is on. So he's also going for his pawn storm, but his pawn storm is not going to be doing anything. If you watched my King's Indian video or my Perk video, you should know that once you have a fianchetted bishop, the only way for the pawn storm to work is for them to trade off this fianchetted bishop. So I'm actually not going to even pay attention to that, and I'm just going to continue with my attack. So let's just play pawn to a5. Okay, king to a7 was played. I'm really paying attention to the fact that his king is on the same diagonal as my bishop. So I'm already looking out for some tactical plans here. For example, chase the knight away, get my knight to d4. But I'm trying to open up this file. So, and I'm also trying to get my queen to a4 or a2 before I do that. With that being said, I'm just going to play a normal, natural developing move, bishop to e3. That's more pieces pointing towards his king, by the way. Eventually, a move like knight to c5 could also be a nice move. Pawn to d4, I wasn't expecting. It's just a very quick blunder. He played a bit fast, by the way, but told you guys about this bishop. The bishop is on the same line as the king. The queen looks like it's attacking my knight, but it's not. Once I simply play the move knight takes d4, it's basically game over. I mean, he has to sack his rook because I have two pieces targeting the knight and I'm attacking the queen. If he moves the queen, I'm going to simply take the knight and this will lead to a checkmate. So he has to sack the rook. And then after he sacks the rook, I may take the rook. I may also play b4, just trying to be fancy. It's over though. So he decided to move the queen. And as we promised, we are going to be checkmating this guy. We have two attackers. Even though he has two defenders, our attackers are just less valuable than his defenders. So once I take on c6 with check, there's just no way for him to take back, which is why he resigned. But more King's Indian attack against 1,500 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,500. We're going to be playing the Kia. That's what they call it. So we develop the knight to f3. He plays knight to f6. And now I play pawn to g3. So it's the same idea that we spoke about a lot. The goal is just to get our king out the center of the board and then start our attack with moves like d3, knight d2, pawn e4, and so on. So he develops the knight to c6, assuming he wants to play e5. It doesn't really matter though. Let's just continue to our plan. And the goal is to get castle as quickly as possible, but we do not want to allow them to easily play a move like pawn to e4. Because now if we castle, the pawn comes to e4, I'm going to be forced to move the knight. So let's play the move pawn to d6. And if you play the Pierre defense, the King's Indian defense with the black pieces, then it's basically the same ideas that I'm going to be teaching you, but with the white pieces. With that being said, I'm basically going to have an additional tempo. So he develops his bishop to c5. I want you guys to notice he's developing his pieces normally. Let me just get my king out the center of the board because this was the natural setup that we were talking about. And obviously, there are a lot of persons who are going to be falling for this idea where they play, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with this move pawn to d5. But whenever you see a bishop on c5 like this, and you're just always going to ensure that you consider this sacrifice on e5. No, we simply take on e5, sacrificing the knight, but it's just a temporary sacrifice. The whole idea is once they take on e5, we play d4, we fork it back. Sometimes you're going to see people taking on f2 thinking they're smart. It's actually not good to take on f2 because, for one, you give up the bishop here, which you don't want to do, and two, my rook just gets the open file. So now we took the knight. This guy's playing surprisingly fast, by the way. So, I'm expecting some blunders to coming up soon. But usually a knight would love to go to the g4 square, seeing that my rook is on f2. So I'm just going to play the prophylactic pawn h3 for now, just to ensure that there's no pieces that is allowed on my half of the board. And then now he plays pawn c6. His king is in the center of the board. I'm not necessarily expecting him to keep his king in the center of the board for the entire game. And I'm thinking of playing bishop g5. There will always be knight to d7. So this is not like winning or anything. So with that being said, I'm just going to continue with my development like usual. So let's just play knight c3 in this position. If he moves the pawn to d4, I'm just going to put the knight on e4. And now that he castled, I was actually waiting on him to castle his king before I play bishop to g5 because this pin is way more annoying if the king is castled. If you guys learned anything in the Italian game, you know that we don't necessarily want to do the pin unless they castled their king. So now that he plays the move queen to d6, it would have been better to play knight d7. No, I'm going to simply take on f6. So I just gave up my bishop for a knight, but his king is now unsafe. So I still want you guys to keep this in mind. Bishops are better than knights, but if you're going to be giving up your bishop for a knight, you want to consider something called the Grand Master trade. So once he takes back, now I'm thinking of how do we continue our attack here? Now, we spoke about focal points. We spoke about attacking the opponent's king. When it comes to attacking the opponent's king, search for the pawns and the squares that is around the opponent's king. But I still need to finish my development. So I'm going to play the move queen to d2 in this position. The idea with queen to d2 is I want to play rook to f1, doubling up my rooks on the file. And I'm also trying to play queen to g6, just getting all my pieces in the game. Now, we still have to check to see what the opponent's last move does. Let's look on the last move. He pulled his knight back to g6. Why did he do that? By pulling the knight back to g6, it opens up this diagonal for the queen to be able to capture on g3. So I don't want to play rook to f1. Okay, now that I'm thinking about it, Nah, I don't think I want all of that drama, but I was actually thinking about allowing him to take so that way I get the open file. But let's just play king to h2. Like, if you have a clear advantage, you really don't need to be complicating the game. Once I double up on the f file, I'm going to have two pieces attacking f6, and I'm basically going to have a very easy game. So no need to complicate stuff. Okay, now he plays knight to h4. It's a creative move. That's the word I'll use. It's creative because I'm not allowed to take the knight due to this pin. The thing is, though, it doesn't really do much. I mean, yes, he may be able to take my bishop. I mean, if I don't want him to take the bishop, I could just pull the bishop back to h1. But I'm not necessarily seeing the reason to save that bishop. I think it's more important that I target the weaknesses around this king. So I'm actually going to start by playing the move queen to h6 in this position. I'm attacking the knight, so I'm basically forcing him to take the bishop. But now I have two pieces attacking this unprotected pawn. And then once he takes my bishop, I mean, taking on f6 is a good in-between move, but I may just take back on g2 because I'm not really seeing what he could do to not lose the f6 pawn, basically. So he did take. Again, I could take here, but then there's queen back threatening here. So let's just take on g2. And then he plays pawn to d4, which is also a bad move. Again, my opponent is playing way too quickly, and he just made another drawback mistake. So he moves his pawn to d4. Pay attention, the pawn no longer covers the e4 square. So I'm just going to move my knight to e4. Now I have three pieces attacking this pawn on f6. He only has the queen guarding it. He has to play the move queen to d5 and pin the knight, by the way, because if he does not pin the knight, then I'm going to take on f6, the king is going to move, and then I'm going to take on h7, and that's going to be a checkmate. So he did find queen to d5, which means I am not able to take on f6 and deliver a checkmate in two moves. Now, rook takes f6 is a free pawn. I'm trying to find a way to make knight takes f6 work. But there's also another very cool idea that I have to continue my attack. Well, there's just a lot of ways to win. The first one is I think if I move my king, I'm just gonna win the queen because he has to sack the queen. The second one that I was thinking of is rook f4, rook h4. But let's just move the king out the way. I mean, it's simple. We're trying to take on f6 with check, and then once the king move, we take the rook or take on h7. The queen is pinning the knight. Let's just move the queen out the way. Our next move is going to be knight takes f6. There's literally nothing he could do to prevent this. I think if he wants to make the game a bit longer, he has to just sacrifice his queen. And if he sacrifices queen, it would mean that I'm just completely winning anyways. So he did sack the queen. Let's just take the queen. And now I'm going to go with the first idea, which is to get my rook to the h4 square. If I'm able to get my rook to the h4 square, that could lead to a checkmate. But I'm assuming he's just going to run away with that rook, actually. So it's best if I'm able to let's just take on f6 first. Let's take on f6 and then double up the rooks on the f file. I want to be a bit more patient with this attack. So he did move the rook out the way. Let's double up on the f file. There's always queen to g5 check, but I want to be able to check the king, and I don't want his king to be able to run away. Okay, but I have a very nice tactical idea that I'm seeing, and it starts with the move rook to f4. So as we spoke about, this is called a rook lift, by the way. It comes with ideas of playing rook to h4, taking on h7, but there's actually a hidden line where, keep in mind, the move I want to play is rook to g4, and then once the king moves, that's going to be a checkmate. So I'm actually thinking about sacrificing this rook on e6, then rook to g4 would be leading to a checkmate, which is why he decided to pull the bishop back to c8. But we spoke about this a lot. You have to think about the drawbacks of your move. So by pulling the bishop back to c8, he no longer guard the pawn on f7. I have two pieces attacking f7. He only has one piece guarding f7. So now I'm just going to be taking on f7, and there's actually no way for him to prevent a checkmate on the next move. So this is GG's. He moves his bishop to e6, but that's just a checkmate. More King's Indian attack against 1600 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1600. Let's play knight to f3. We're going to be hitting him with a Kia King's Indian attack. Then pawn c5 was played. As we said, you could play this against anything. So it doesn't really matter what black plays. Just play pawn to g3 next move. We're going to play bishop to g2, and we're going to simply castle or king. So we're basically playing against something that is very similar to some Sicilian defense setup. We're always going to be going for the same idea. This is step one. We already got step one out of the way. Step two is to play pawn to d3 with the whole idea of playing moves like pawn to e4. And the opponent plays the move pawn to h6 because he's probably trying to prevent us from putting something on g5. But that was not my intention. And then the next move that I'm going to play here is pawn c3. Now, keep in mind, this pawn c3 move is very thematic if you're going to be playing Kia, because it allows your queen to get access to c2. It also ensures that this bishop is not as active as it needs to be. So he develops his knight to f6. Now let's play knight to d2, and keep in mind, a lot of time we're going to be putting our knight in front of this bishop on c1, because the bishop is usually already active once it's on c1, and we're not necessarily trying to bring this a1 rook in the game too early. So the opponent castles the king. Let's play pawn to e4. This is the typical setup, by the way, just See where the pieces are. See the castle, the fianchetted bishop, the knights pointing towards each other. He plays knight c6. A lot of times we are definitely going to be playing e4, but don't rush this pawn move. For example, if we play pawn e5, he plays knight g4. He already has three pieces targeting the pawn. I mean, I should be able to play d4 and guard the pawn though, but um I'm not trying to do all of that. Let's just continue with our idea. Let's go queen to e2. We're just basically putting the pieces where we know they belong. And then once he plays this pawn to d5 move, now you could play pawn to e5. Again, knight g4 was played. He could very well be getting his knight trapped on g4. He is attacking my pawn three times. I'm only guarding the pawn twice. So let's play pawn to d4 and apply more defense to the pawn. So already we have this very nice pawn chain happening here. His knight is already out of place. I mean, the thing is, he has to play a weird move here, like h5. And h5 is just to ensure that his knight does not get trapped. And then he has to pull his knight back to the edge of the board. So that's going to be, yeah, so he did find h5. He's definitely not going to be getting his knight trapped. So I'm not necessarily going to be rushing the whole idea of playing pawn to h3 here. Unless I'm able to win a free pawn. I think I'm able to win a free pawn here if I'm not being too greedy, because why isn't this just a free pawn? And the answer to that is if I take this pawn, the pawn no longer guards e5. So he's going to have three attackers versus my two defenders. But what if I do play the h3 move and then his knight no longer guards e5? Now I take on c5. He has two attackers. I have two defenders. I'm safe. And okay, queen c7 makes some sense. Now he has one, two, three attackers. I have one, two defenders, which means all we need to do is add more defenders. So let's just go rook to e1, typical King's Indian move. And b4 is basically my idea. I want to play moves like pawn b4, knight b3, and I'm just going to be ahead by a clean pawn. Now, one thing I like about the King's Indian attack is, for one, your opponent is not going to be facing these types of openings a lot. You know, they're more used to stuff like e4 or d4 or London or those types of openings. He plays pawn to a5, which was a good prophylactic move. He's basically trying to prevent me from playing b4 so that way my pawn on c5 becomes a bit weaker. But let's just continue focusing on our development. I'm going to play the move knight to b3 because one, it allows my bishop to get more space, and two, I wasn't really expecting pawn to a4, to be honest, but my plan was to put my knight on the d4 square. And the good thing is, if he wants to regain this pawn, he just can't take on d4. Because if he takes on d4 and I take back, then my pawns are just secure and I'm officially ahead by a clean pawn, which is why he plays knight to f5. And that's not a bad move. But he's attacking my knight twice. I'm guarding my knight twice, which means my knight is safe. I'm thinking of just playing knight b5 here. I mean, it is a move on his half of the board. The queen would be forced to go back, and then my knight gets this very beautiful square on d6. So definitely not a bad plan. The thing is, I don't think I'm in any rush to do that. I'm not in any rush to do that because how is he going to prevent me from playing knight b5? Unless he's trying to move his knight out the way, and then it's going to be hard for me to defend this. That could be something. If I take here, I'm assuming he's going to be taking with the f pawn. Okay, fine. Let's play knight b5 and hit the queen. Let's force the queen away, and let's develop the bishop to either g5 or f4. Knight to d6 is what I'm not in a rush to play, but I think I need to play knight b5 if I'm really trying to hold on to my pawn. And usually in these types of position, it's best to just play b6, admit that you lost the pawn, and just try to get some activity on the queen side. So the queen moves over to e7. Very nice idea. He's trying to take my pawn. Bishop e3 is the first thing that came to mind, but I will be leaving my e5 pawn with less defenders. So let's just jump into d6 here. And obviously, it's bad for him to take. I'm expecting something like b6, which would actually give me another pawn. So I'm not sure what his next move is. My next move, okay. Mm. So he decided to blunder an entire knight. I think, okay, I knew what he saw. He's basically saying, I'm going to remove the guard of your knight. And then when you take my knight, I take your knight. But he's not doing his math correctly. That's the thing. His math is not mathing at all because he just took 1 point. I just took three. And then he just took 3 points. I just took another three. So even if he takes on d6, I'm the one who is ahead in material. I'm ahead by an entire piece, bro. So this is just game over. Now let's just finish our development. Let's play bishop to f4, develop my last piece, putting my bishop on the same diagonal as his queen, which means we are threatening some nasty discovers. So I am expecting him to just move the queen out the way. And then from here, I may just swing my last piece into the game and just wait until he plays another blunder. So queen to b6 was played, not bad. What move am I expecting? F6 leaves this unprotected. He's not attacking this. The bishop is not able to go here. I mean, he's in bad shape. Let's not rush. Let's just go rook to d1. All our pieces are active. I'm thinking of playing pawn g4 to start some attack on his king. There will always be chances for us to trade the queens off the board. And then once we're able to trade the queens off the board, it's going to be automatic game over. Queen to a5. Maybe he wants to play b6 followed by bishop a6. Still doesn't do much. I could play c4 to open some lines. I think this is my time to start some attack on his king, which is definitely not necessary, but I like to attack, so why not? Pawn c4 I really like though. Because if c4 he has to take, then my knight takes, hits the queen. That's also attacking. So I wanted to play g4, but let's play pawn c4. If he takes, my knight takes and his queen is under attack. Otherwise, I have like three pieces attacking d5. So even if he tries to defend d5, he's going to be losing a pawn. So he did decide to take. Let's just take, hit the queen. Queen has to move. And now my pieces are just so active. Like, look on my pieces pointing towards this queen side. I don't think I should be focused on any sort of king side attack here because my pieces are pointing towards the queen side. So I'm going to be pointing my pieces towards the queen side and focusing on the weaknesses that he has on the queen side instead. Queen to b4. That's already a blunder. Hopefully, you guys are able to spot the move. But he immediately just put his queen on the same line as two of my rooks. Well, on the same line as his rooks. So I'm able to play a fork where I put my bishop on d6, which hits the queen, hits the rook at the same time. He is forced to move the queen. And then once he moves the queen, we take even more material. And then we're now going to be ahead by 4 points. He moves the queen. We take the rook. Question is, how does he recapture? Is he gonna? Okay, he decided to take with the king, so I'm thinking of some checkmating ideas. We're definitely gonna play the move rook to d8 and check the king here. And the reason why we're gonna play this is so that way his king come closer to the center of the board, so that way we can set up some checkmates. My rook is under attack though, so I have to be careful. So let's just play rook to d1 here, guarding both of the rooks. I'm trying to find no, I'm trying to find checkmate. His queen is unprotected, so I'm also thinking of some moves like just any nice discovered attack where if his queen takes my queen, I deliver a checkmate. That would be fancy. So he plays pawn to e5. So my idea of knight d6, sacking the queen and then playing rook here, yeah, that's just not gonna work. That's also not a free pawn because if I take, he has two pieces guarding. What I could do though is I could play the move rook to d5. It's a move on his half of the board, so definitely has to be one of the best moves. And once his queen moves away, now I have enough pieces attacking his pawn on e5. So I almost took on e5. That would be crazy. If I take on e5, that's going to be a checkmate. Well, not a checkmate, but I'm going to be losing my queen. So still not taking on e5. Okay, if I sack the rook, he takes my rook. So let's just get rid of the queen. Let's play the move rook to d6. Let's attack the queen. If the queen takes my rook, I take on d6 and I'm fine. There's no way for him to keep the queen on this diagonal, which means we're definitely taking on e5 next move. Okay, so now that the queen went back to a7, this is the time to take on e7. The opponent decides to resign. But more King's Indian attack against 1,700 players. Stick around. Opponent is now in the 1,700 region. Let's go knight f3. We're playing the King's Indian attack, which can be played against any opening that black plays. So notice how we're just not necessarily minding what they play. We're just going to get step one out the way. And once we get step one out the way, the goal is now to focus on step two, which is to play moves like pawn to d3, knight to d2, pawn to e4. So bishop c5 was played. That's not an accurate move, by the way, because immediately I'm able to play d4 and attack the bishop. But let's not rush. Let's just play the move knight d2. Let's just continue with our idea. He castles the king, and now we play pawn to e4. So eventually, I'm going to be able to have a pawn on c3. I'm going to be able to play e5 and attack the knight, and I'm going to be starting some attack on his king if he allows it. It all depends on how he plays. Knight c6 was played. It's not a bad move. I mean, he's developing, and we know what the thematic move here is. Pawn c3, preventing any piece from coming in. It also allows me to play d4 and attack the bishop, and then e5 and attacking the knight is coming. So eventually, I may have a very nice pawn chain happening here. He plays a5. I guess he's trying to prevent me from playing b4. I'm kind of waiting on him to play d5 so that way his bishop is bad before I play e5. Now, I should be able to play e5, but his knight is just going to get access to the d5 square. So let's continue with moves like queen c2. And the reason why I'm choosing c2 and not e2 is I'm trying to point my queen towards his h7 pawn. And I'm already thinking about moves like e5, d4, knight g5, and there could be some threats, especially if I'm able to use my bishop to attack his bishop. And then he plays pawn to d6. This is crazy, by the way, because nine moves in the position and my opponent is already blundering a piece. Like he totally just trapped his bishop outside of the pawn chain. Now, once I play pawn to d4, the bishop just has nowhere to go and he's immediately losing. And that's one thing I notice when I play the King's Indian attack, where they just don't know what to do. And eventually we play the move that we know that we're going to play, and then they just blunder. So bishop takes. Let's take on d4 here. And this is just winning. I mean, knight b4 attacks my queen. He is also applying pressure to my e4 pawn. And there's bishop to a6 that I need to be careful about. So it is winning, but I just need to be careful. For example, if I play queen b1, there is bishop a6, and he will be threatening bishop to d3. So with that being said, let's just play the move queen c3 here and chase his knight out on the next move. And if he wants to take on e4, I mean, he should take on e4. Well, he did take on e4. Let's take back. And then once the bishop takes, we have to ensure that we're careful about any knight c2, hit the rook. Rook has to go to some weird square, and then he gets some discovered attacks. I mean, I would like to just play h3, to be honest, and just get rid of the knight. A nice move would also be knight e1, just trade the pieces off the board. So, like, that would definitely be playable. I'm thinking of playing bishop g5, though, to just hit the queen. And then once he plays f6, weakness king a bit, and then I pull my bishop back. I'm also seeing his knight just going to the d5 square and attacking my queen. So yeah, because of that move, let's just go with the more forward knight g5, I would say. Because the whole idea is to trade pieces off the board. Like, if you have an advantage, just trade all the pieces off the board. It makes the game so easy and simple for you. So he took. Let's just take back. And now I'm just going to chase the knight out on the next move. I am expecting the knight to go to this d5 square, though. He did play knight d5, and my queen is under attack. I mean, I have to move my queen. So why not just move the queen to c2, threatening a checkmate on h7? I mean, what are the odds that he misses that I'm threatening a checkmate? Someone at 1700 is not going to miss that. I'm expecting either, yeah, pawn g6 or knight back to f6. Pawn g6 was played. He is weakening his king a bit, so I really like that. Now I just need to develop my last piece. Let's go bishop d2, not bishop to e3, because my bishop is the only defender of my knight and the queen is attacking my knight. So we're not trying to fall for any removing the guard tactic. Now, based on looking on this position, my next objective is to trade this knight off the board. I mean, obviously, we need to trade pieces once we're winning, but this is actually a very nice knight. Like, I do not have a pawn that could easily attack the knight. And then he plays pawn c5, which is not a bad move. But because I have an isolated pawn, I'm just going to take on c5. It also allows my bishop to get access to this diagonal in the future. I mean, we're not going to play the move now. That would be a drawback mistake. Let's just play the move rook to d1. putting my rook on the same line as the queen, and then my f rook in this position would be the only piece that is not doing anything. He plays queen to f6. Now I'm thinking of playing the move knight e4. Like I was waiting on him to attack my knight, then I play knight e4. But why not just knight e4 now, immediately gaining a tempo on the queen? I'm trying to play moves like either bishop h6 to attack the rook, but the idea of bishop c3 is just very strong, especially since his knight on d5 is so strong, and I'm trying to trade pieces off the board anyways. Let's just play bishop to c3. And even if he takes with the knight, why not just take with the queen? There's no issue that we're going to have if we trade the pieces off the board. But my fellow viewers, my opponent did not take the bishop, and I have such a nice tactic in this position. Basically, my bishop on the dark square is dominating the position. His king has nowhere to go. I'm basically going to play the move knight f6, and then once the king moves, the king is going to be on the same diagonal as my bishop, and then I'm just going to pull the knight to g4 and win his queen. However, if I put my knight on the f6 square, the knight is just going to take on f6. And that's where the forcing move on his half of the board, rook takes d5, comes in. Remember, when it comes to finding the best move in chess, we always want to consider moves on his half of the board, always calculate the checks and the captures first. Once he takes, we play the move knight to f6, and it's just GG's from here. I am expecting resignation, but once he puts his king on a dark square, this is going to be called discovered attack. So he moves the king, knight to g4, checks the king, attacks the queen. He pulls the king back to g8, and that's just a checkmate. But more King's Indian attack against 1800 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1800. Let's go knight f3, some more King's Indian attack, pawn d5, we play g3. And as I've been saying the whole entire video, it really doesn't matter what black plays. Now, knight c6, he wants to play e5. We're still going to play bishop to g2. And now that he plays e5, we do not castle the king. Because if we castle the king, he plays e4, and then he's chasing our knight all about the board. So let's play the move pawn to d3, preventing his pawn from going to e4. And then after he develops his bishop, now we get our king out the center. Now, my opponent is playing very active. So that's definitely something. He develops his bishop to d6. Let's continue with our old idea. We know where the knight goes. Let's put the knight on d2. We know that we're going to be playing moves like pawn to e4. Knight f6 was played. Now we play pawn to e4. And again, this is basically the setup of the Kia. The pawn goes to c3 a lot of times, and this bishop will not stay on h3 for long. Like, I'm thinking of just playing h3 and chase away the bishop. Now, one thing I need to mention to you guys is this knight goes to c4 a lot. So if he, for example, plays something like pawn to d4, not only is he really blocking in his dark squared bishop, but then I'm able to play knight c4, and I have a very nice active knight on c4, which is why he decided to take. And taking with the knight is a very good move, but I like to just take with the pawn because this knight will eventually go to c4 or find some other good squares. He decided to castle the king, and now you guys know the purpose of pawn to c3. Pawn to c3 is to prevent any pieces from going to d4, but it also ensures that my queen is able to go to either c2, b3, or a4 and get out of this pin. Bishop to c5 was played. That's a very aggressive square for a bishop. And, you could say he's trying to get his queen to this d3 square. So now I'm thinking, do I put the queen on e2? Do I put the queen on c2? Hmm. Let's play queen c2. So that way, if I have to move, well, if the queen was on e2, it would have done the same thing. I'm thinking of just playing b4 though, to just chase away the bishop. And that's another reason why we play pawn c3. So it's a defensive type of move to prevent anything from coming to d4, but it also comes with aggressive moves like pawn to b4. Now he plays knight back to d7. I mean, I'm not exactly sure why. I guess the knight is going to b6 or something, or he's trying to play queen to f6 and apply some pressure to my knight on f3. But let's play pawn to b4. Let's continue with our idea. We are attacking the bishop, and if he pulls the bishop back to b6, I'm not going to immediately play a4 followed by a5 with the whole idea of trapping the bishop. First, I really like to play moves like knight to c4, because once you play a move like knight to c4, it targets the bishop. So the bishop pair is already guaranteed. But how I like to get the bishop here is to play a move like a4, threaten to trap the bishop, and then once they move this pawn, I take the bishop so that way they double up the pawns in a very ugly way, basically. On to f5. That's why he moves the knight. He's trying to play f5 and start some attack on my knight, but that seems to be very inaccurate. First of all, the immediate move that stood out to me is just putting my queen on the same diagonal as his king. If he takes on e4, let's say my queen takes back and he tries to play something like bishop f5, I'm just going to check his king. So f4, f5 didn't really do much. So let's continue with our idea. I am threatening to trap his bishop, but if he plays a5, I'm just going to play b5 and attack the knight. And eventually I'll be able to take the bishop. And my bishop is going to be able to develop to a3 and attack his rook. I could also play bishop to g5, but a6 was played. I want to play b5, but then the pawn takes. I want to play a5, but then the bishop moves. The move I really want to play, though, is just to take on b6, so that way I could say I'm the one with the bishop here. But I prefer to create some threats in the position. Let's play the move bishop to a3. Bishop to a3 creates a threat. You always want to ensure that you're creating threats on the opponent. For example, my pawn is in the way, but once I'm able to play a move like pawn b5, his rook will be under attack and he's going to be in trouble. So now he has to think about getting his rook off the same diagonal as my bishop, which, is defensive moves. So I think he's trying to attack me on the king side, but he does not know that he's the one who needs to defend. So rook to e8 was played. It's a fair move. Okay, I'm trying to set up some tactic here. I'm trying to set up some tactic. Okay, let's say I play knight g5. What if I just play knight g5? If he plays h6, I play queen b3, putting my queen on the same diagonal as the king. And if he takes my knight, I get some nice discovered attack, like, for example, taking on b6. I could also start. I think I need to start by playing the move queen to b3. So that way, he's going to say, hey, I'm going to get my king off the same diagonal as the queen. And then he's going to. I almost blundered my knight. That's embarrassing. Like, I just forgot that I put my bishop on h3. So knight to g5 is not an idea. That's not an idea. Let's just play the regular moves. Okay, he moves his rook to e8 though. Does that mean I'm able to take this pawn? If I take the pawn, I'm positive that he's going to play pawn to e4 and attack my knight. And my knight does not have a lot of good forward moves. But you know what they say? A pawn is a pawn at the end of the day. Once he plays pawn to e4, I'm going to play the move knight to h4. And it means I'm guarding my pawn. He didn't play h4 though. He decided to play queen to f6, which makes a lot of sense. Probably makes even more sense because now he has two pieces attacking my pawn. All right, what I'm thinking of doing in this position is to break principles, put the knight on the edge of the board, with the whole idea of just holding on to the pawn. The good thing is, I'm also threatening to play moves like pawn to h3, chasing away his bishop. There's ideas of queen to e4, attacking the bishop. And there's also ideas of bishop to d5. And bishop to d5 also have some checkmating ideas that could happen. So let's see. If I do not play the move pawn to b5, then my move bishop to a3 would be a waste. Okay, he pulled his bishop back to a7. Why did he pull his bishop back to a7? Like, I'm thinking of just playing pawn b5, and then once he moves the knight out the way, he's just going to be losing his b7 pawn. Yeah, that move was mad, unnecessary. Let's play pawn to b5. My bishop is on the same line as this unprotected pawn. So, unless he's going to play knight back to d8 and guard the pawn, which is an ugly and uncomfortable move to play, like, nobody's going to be comfortable with playing a move like that. If he takes, I just take back though. Okay, let's just take back. The knight is still under attack. It's either knight e7 or knight d8. He decided to play knight e7, but knight e7 not only loses the knight, he's about to lose a piece. I want you guys to notice how my rook is on the same line as his bishop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take on b7 and attack the rook. And if he moves the rook to attack my bishop, I'm going to take on e7. And again, I'm finding these moves because these are forcing moves. Always consider moves on the opponent's half of the board and consider your checks and your captures first. So once I takes and he moves the rook, I take on e7, which opens up my rook to attack his bishop. And once he takes back my bishop, I take his bishop and I'm protecting my rook. So let's just take on b7 in this position. And this is not just GG's. Oh, he saw it. He plays knight takes f5. That's crazy. I wasn't even expecting him to see it. But anyways, this is also bad for him. Like he's I think he's about to lose even more material than a rook. Here's what I'm seeing. And again, there's a tactic on the screen. Try to find the tactic based on how I teach you guys to calculate, but look for the unprotected pieces. The bishop in this position is the unprotected pieces. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to take the rook because it's just a rook who's not going to take a rook. And okay, if he takes my knight, I'm not going to lie, like taking back the knight is going to be risky, but I'm going to make it work. I mean, it's a knight. I'm not going to not take the knight. But if he takes my bishop, the rook and his bishop on g4 becomes unprotected pieces. And that's why I'm going to go queen e4, hitting both of the pieces. Plus, his bishop on a7 is unprotected, and my rook is on the same line as the unprotected bishop. So there's just so many tactic in this position. It's crazy. Even though he's losing, I still think the best bet for him is to just take on h4, which is what he does. So he knows what he's doing. Okay, let's say I take on h4. If I take on h4, he takes on h8, I still fork him. So we are taking on h4. The reason why I'm so scared to play moves like taking on h4 is it exposes my king. Like there's this open file pointing towards my king. Now all he needs to do is find a way to put his queen on the file, which is not possible because if the queen goes here, I just trade. So he decided to take with the rook. The whole idea was to fork the unprotected rook and the unprotected bishop. If he decides to save the bishop, I take the unprotected rook. If he moves the rook, I take the unprotected bishop. And we will not only be ahead by a piece, we're going to be ahead by an entire rook. Okay, now I'm ahead by a piece, by the way. I have to be very careful not to lose. Now, my opponent decided to play e4, and okay, the bishop is no longer guarding the rook. So I think he's in trouble now. He's in trouble now. Because, okay, what he sees is if I take the knight, queen to g3 is just outright checkmate. But what I see is forcing moves on his half of the board, where I play the move queen to d5 and I check the king. I'm going to say check, and his rook is still an unprotected piece. So, I mean, he has to, it's just losing. It's crazy. Because now that he moves his king over to h8, now I take the rook with check. And then once he blocks with the knight, I don't even take with the bishop because I could be getting checkmated. I take with the queen with check. And then his queen has to take, and then I take, and then now I'm ahead by 11 points. That's very nice, though. Like, I almost thought I was about to get checkmated. The opponent resigns. But more Kia against 1900 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1900. We're still playing some King's Indian attack. He decides to play pawn c5. Let's play pawn g3. We're just going to go bishop g2 and castle, regardless of what he plays. G6, we castle. Now, it looks as if my opponent is playing the Sicilian dragon versus the King's Indian attack. So let's see how this goes. Step one is out the way. Let's play d3. This is step two. The goal is to play e4. He plays d6. I play e4. And he's basically trying to attack like this. I'm trying to attack like this. He puts the bishop on the diagonal. And whenever you see this bishop on this diagonal, you always want to play a move like pawn c3 because now the bishop is not as active on this diagonal anymore. He pulls the knight back to d7. Maybe he's trying to put the knight on e5, but that does not do anything. Let's continue with our plan. Let's play knight to d2. Remember, it's okay to block this bishop out for now. He plays pawn to e5, which is a decent move, but he is leaving his d6 pawn unprotected. So I'm not going to say I'm going to punish him for that, but I'm going to be able to exploit the drawback of his last move by playing the move knight c4, attacking d6. And remember, I told you guys about a knight being on c4. If you're going to have a knight on c4, I was about to say ensure that you're prepared to face moves like pawn b5, but he decided to protect the pawn by playing the move knight to b6. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play the move bishop to g5 and attack the queen, knowing that he's able to play pawn to f6 and chase away my bishop. Now, the reason why I wanted him to play f6 was because if he plays f6, he would be weakening his bishop. He decided to move the queen out the way, though, so that's definitely a smart move. Now, one thing I'm not going to do is take the knight because then he gets the file. What I am going to do, though, is just play the move queen to d2. My development is complete. My king and my rooks are the only pieces that is on the back rank. So I'm expecting h6, but I'm just going to pull my bishop back. I was also expecting bishop e6. Now he has two pieces attacking my knight on c4. But here's what I'm going to do. I was thinking of pulling my knight back to e3, but that's the square for my bishop. And if he plays h6, I will get my knight trapped. So I am actually going to be taking on b6. But the move I want to play is d4, but I'm not gonna lie. The guy literally has all his pieces are covering the d4 square. So if I play d4, he's just gonna like takes, and then play knight takes, and then queen takes, and I'm not gonna be able to play pawn to d4 for now. But I'm going to try to make f4 work. If I'm able to play f4, it will be able to open some lines for me to attack. So let's play the move knight to h4 here. And remember what I tell you guys, we're not putting our knight on the edge of the board for the knight to stay on the edge of the board. I'm just putting my knight on the edge of the board so that way I'm able to play f4. Eventually, I'll be moving my knight off the edge of the board. Okay, he pulls the bishop back to d7. I have to be a bit careful here. If I play f4, pawn to h6 still traps the bishop. And this is one of the reasons why I tell you guys that, no need to rush to develop your dark squared bishop. Let me just pull the bishop back to e3, putting it on the same diagonal as the queen. And now I don't have to worry about pawn to h6, which means I will be able to play pawn to f4 to start an attack. Not sure where he's planning on getting castled. Bishop f6 is not a bad move. He's trying to just eliminate my knight, and maybe he wants to say he's weakening my king. But I'm not going to play a passive move like knight back to f3. I'm still going to play pawn to f4 because if he takes on f4, which he didn't, I was expecting him to take on f4. But now that he takes on h4, I take back, and maybe he's like, okay, your king is weak. I'm doubling up your pawns. But I have the bishop here. You guys have to remember that the bishop here is a slight advantage to have. So if he's not able to prove, how is he going to attack my king? If he's not able to prove that, then I'm just chilling with the bishop here. But then he plays f5. Like, this is not how you counter someone with the bishop here. You don't try to open the position, especially since he's not castled. Like, I'm also surprised the guy's just not castling his king. So my goal from here is just to open the position. I'm going to try my best to get rid of as much pawns as I possibly can, starting by taking on f5 so that way my bishop gets this long diagonal. Now, I have a little idea to get, just to force him to have an isolated pawn where I take the knight and then take on e5. And then once he takes, I play bishop to g5, preventing him from castling on the queen side. And then rook to e1 targets the isolated pawn. That's definitely a plan. Now, I want to take on e5, but then once he takes with the knight, pawn to d4 is not as effective because he is able to play knight c4. So I'm actually going to be going with that idea. For some reason, my opponent is not castling. Not sure why, but let's say I takes, queen takes, pawn takes. Bishop g5 prevents queenside attack, but he is able to go kingside castling. I don't think I want to allow him to get the bishop here if he's going to simply castle a king. The only way I'm going to give him the bishop here is if I'm able to keep his king in the center of the board. Okay, I have a little idea. I'm thinking about playing b4, but not now though. I think he's trying to castle the king, so I'm going to play the move bishop to d5 just to prevent his king from castling on the king side. And then if he chooses to castle on the queen side, pawn to b4 is going to basically open the queen side. But he saw that and he decided to move his queen off the same diagonal as my bishop. Now, I'm thinking of taking on e5, and if the knight takes, pawn to d4 attacks the knight because he's not going to be able to play knight c4. So let's go with that idea. Let's take on e5. And keep in mind, I have one plan here. Keep the guy's king in the center of the board open the position because I have the bishop here. Anytime you have the bishop here, you want to open the position. So after he plays knight takes, I play d4. I'm trying to get rid of as much pawns as I possibly can. And I'm also trying to keep his king in the center of the board. I was expecting him to play this knight to g5 move, but this is all I wanted. His king is officially stuck in the center of the board. Hit him with something like bishop to g5. Now you guys see all the persons who are like, oh, knights are better than bishops, knights are able to fork, knights are tricky pieces. This is why bishops are better than knights. It's funny how a 1900 got their king stuck in the center of the board after like 21 moves. Like, don't be like this Nigerian guy. He just don't castle his king. There's so much that he could have done, but he decided not to castle the king. Now he's just never going to be able to castle his king. And I am going to be playing moves like rook to e1, checking his king. So he decided to start running away with his king immediately. But I noticed that the king is on the same line as the queen. So I'm immediately thinking of playing moves like taking on c5, but then he takes with the queen with check, and that could give him the tempo. I like the idea of playing pawn to h3. Isn't this just trapping the knight? Like, where is he going to put the knight if I play h3? And the good thing is, if he plays h6 counter-attacking, I just take the knight. Because if he takes my bishop, I take his bishop and I'm ahead by a piece. So let's just play pawn to h3. Looks like I'm just ahead by a knight already. So, and his king is in the center of the board. So this is like, yeah, this is like such a huge advantage. I wasn't expecting to win his knight. I was just expecting to swing my rook over, check his king, and try to find some ways to checkmate him. He puts the knight on e5. I mean, he's just trying to get something for the knight because he's about to lose it. But let's just take that knight. I'm assuming he's, oh, pawn c5. He's trying to check somewhere along this diagonal. It's not going to help him though. I'm thinking of pawn e6 and just check the king. But then his king just runs back to c8. So I think I'm just going to take on d6, just keep the position open. And taking on d6 is bad. I'm assuming he's going to check. Okay, he did take. This is over now. So tempo is very important here. And I could simply take on b7 and that's winning the game. But bishop to f4 attacks the queen with tempo. And I'm trying to force his queen off the same line as my king. So he has to play something like queen b6 or queen c5, and then I should be able to block the check with tempo. And then he has to put the queen back on d6 because if he allows me to move my bishop and get a discovered attack on his queen, it's GG's. So he puts the queen back on d6. Now I'm going to play the move rook to d1, putting my rook on the same line as his queen and his king. But then bishop to d3 was a good try. All I need, oh, this is actually winning. Like, that's a good try. Maybe he thinks queen to g3 check is going to help him, but it's not. I'm actually about to win more material. I want you guys to find a nice way to win a bishop, but taking on c4 is a forcing move. Always consider your checks and your captures. But once I take on c4, if he takes my bishop, I take his queen. If he checks me, okay, pause. Because if he checks and I block, he takes. So take on c4, check, move the king, takes with check, block the check. Then if he takes, I win his queen. Very good. Let's take on c4. Calculation is very, very important. So he checks. If I block the check, he takes with check. Now, if I go to h1, the bishop is pinned and not able to mate. So now once I go here, yes, he's able to take on h3 with check. But now all I need to do is block the check. And I'm forcing the queens off the board and I'm about to win his bishop. If he takes on e3, taking on d3 is going to be a fork. So it's really just GG's here. Oh, that's actually interesting. I wasn't expecting him to play that, but he's basically trying to get both of my rooks for the queen, but I'm able to just take here and this is losing. It's like it's two rooks versus a queen and I have the two extra bishops. And this king is stuck in the center of the board. I'm gonna play moves like bishop h3 or bishop b5 to check the king and eventually checkmate the king. So pawn b6, we play bishop to b5, check, force the king to move. The king moves. Queen swoops in with check. Everything is coming in. I'm not necessarily calculating a checkmate here, but I just know that there's nowhere for his pieces to go. So the king moves over, bishop c4 with check, forcing the king in the corner of the board. And okay, this is actually checkmate. He pulls the king back to f8. This is why bishops are so important. That's just a checkmate. But more King's Indian attack against 2,000 rated players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 2,000. We're finishing off our King's Indian attack. And as we stated before, we could play this against anything. Now, this will be a tough game. Knight f6, we play g3, just the regular stuff. Like, I'm not going to be explaining why I'm going to play these moves, like, because you guys should already know exactly what's going to happen. So let's just get these moves out of the way quickly so that way I can start explaining, more deep stuff. So d5, now we play knight d2. The plan is to play e4 and try to start some attack. There's also ideas of c3 that we could play as well. So c5, here we play. I mean, there is c3, there is e4. Let's just play e4. If he plays d5, it's going to be transposed into like King's Indian defense, where I'm playing up the tempo, but he's also playing the King's Indian defense. So he took on e4. Sometimes it's good to take with the knight and then just trade and have a regular game. But I like to take with the pawn and eventually put my queen on e2, play pawn c3, swing my rook to the d file. For example, whenever you see a move like knight c6, they usually likely want to get their knight to d4. So we play pawn c3 to prevent that. And sometimes moves like queen to d3 becomes very, very annoying. Whenever we see moves like these, we can actually play rook e1 followed by bishop f1 and then just chase the queen out. But if they don't do it, then we should play something like queen e2 or queen c2 to prevent this. Okay, now he plays b6. It's kind of suspicious seeing that he's opening this diagonal. I'm immediately thinking of playing a move like e5. I think he's trying to get his bishop on this diagonal, actually. So I'm actually thinking of playing queen e2. And then if he plays a5, I play rook to d1. And then if he plays bishop a6, I play knight c4. Let's go with that idea. It's very risky, though, I'm not going to lie. But I'm expecting a5 because he's trying to put his bishop on this diagonal. So basically, if you guys know what a weakness in chess is, it's a pawn or a square that cannot be guarded by another pawn. If you have a look on my d3 square, it cannot be guarded by another pawn. So I think what my opponent is trying to do is he's trying to put his pieces on this d3 square, but I'm not going to allow it. I'm going to play rook d1, I'm going to play knight c4, and I'm going to basically ensure that it doesn't happen. So e5 was played. E5 definitely weakens his d5 square. I'm thinking of playing knight c4 to immediately target his weak e5 pawn. And again, I'm gonna always have to be on the lookout for this bishop a6 move. For example, knight c4, there is bishop a6. So I'm gonna actually start by playing rook to d1, putting my rook on the same line as the queen. And usually when you do this against high-rated players, they just immediately move their queen off. Now, if I play knight c4, there's bishop a6. I want to find a good square for my queen. Like, I mean, knight a4, bishop a6. There's also pawn b3, pawn b5. There's knight d6. Okay, it's already a very complex position. I don't want to play something like queen to e3 and allow knight g4. So let's go with the idea of knight c4. Bishop a6 is the move that I'm expecting now, and my knight will be pinned to my queen. So I have to be very careful in a position like that. So bishop a6 was expecting that move. Let's just go ahead and play pawn b3 so that way my knight is fine. And I may just move my queen away and allow him to double up my pawns, but at least I could argue that I'm getting the bishop here. Knight to a5 would definitely be an aggressive and an annoying move if he finds that move. But knight a5, I'm probably going to just pull my knight back to d2, guarding the c4 square. But my opponent is playing some chess, I'm not going to lie. Like, this is actually someone that I know, which is why I say it's not going to be an easy game. So he plays rook to d8, and Okay, rook to d8 definitely allows me to connect my rook. So let's go bishop to g5 here. And my plan is just to connect my rooks. One thing I want you guys to keep in mind though, his knight is not able to get to d4. Eventually, I want to get one of my knights on the d5 square. So after he plays h6, I am going to take on f6. And okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm thinking of queen e3 to attack this pawn. I'm assuming he's going to be doubling up my pawn. So I want to play bishop f1 first, but then he has knight here, queen e3, then he takes. So I'm assuming it's the same thing. But let's go bishop f1. I'm trying to be as safe as I possibly can. His pawn on h6 is unprotected, and if he allows queen e3, the thing is, I want both my queen and my knight on the e3 square. So if I could get my knight to e3, then d5, that would be great. So instead of playing queen e3, I think I need to play queen c2. So knight a5, I was expecting. No, there's no more queen c2 because he's trying to double up my pawns. Unless I play queen e3, knight takes c4, then I take on h6, and then he attacks my queen, and then I have to move my queen, but then his knight is gonna be pinned. It's gonna be aggressive. So do we just play knight to d2? Nah, I think that's passive. Let's go with queen to e3 and attack this pawn. And if he takes attack my queen, I am thinking of playing queen takes h6. And I'm not gonna lie, that's such a risky move. Because at first I'm thinking, okay, his knight is pinned, so his knight has nowhere to go. But then after I look on the position, I think there is knight to b2 to attack my rook. And then if I take his rook, I'm giving him the file. So I'm gonna have to just deal with these double pawns on c4. Now, what I get in return for having the double pawns is this weakness on d5. However, if I'm not able to put one of my pieces on the d5 square and say I'm controlling the weakness, then my double pawns are going to be too weak. So I think I think black is about to have a static advantage, and I'm about to have a dynamic advantage. And the static advantage basically means the long-term advantage. It's usually not good to give the opponent the long-term advantage unless you're like super super aggressive. Now, one thing I want you guys to keep in mind is if he plays knight takes c4, we're not going to be taking with the pawn because I'm going to have the defensive bishop. He's going to have the aggressive bishop. So I have to take with my bishop. And then he takes pawn takes. The good thing is I have the double pawns, but I'm not seeing exactly how he's going to attack the double pawns. And his d5 score is going to be so weak. Like I'm going to play moves like rook to d5, rook to d1. And then the moment I play rook d5, if he takes, so yeah, he did go for the idea. He took with the bishop first. Doesn't really change much. I'm going to take with my bishop. I'm threatening to play bishop to d5, and his knight is on the edge of the board. So he has to take on c4 here. I'm not gonna lie, like at first I did not like my position. I'm not gonna act as if I'm better. I'm not better. Like if I sit here with isolated double pawns acting like I'm better, then I'm just telling lies. But I don't hate my position because I'm the only one who is able to put something on d5. And even after takes, I'm also attacking h6. So I also have the tempo. Yo, I wasn't expecting King G7. I guess he has too much respect for my double pawns. Like, do I just play bishop to D5 now? And then I don't have double pawns anymore? Or do I just leave the bishop on C4 and said, hey, I'm okay with the double pawns. Let's just play rook to D5. And if he takes, I play nope. I'm not doing that. Let's play bishop to d5. I have a very strong bishop on d5. His knight is on the edge of the board. I'm assuming he's going to play knight back to c6. But here's the good thing about these types of structure. I'm never, ever going to be playing pawn c4 because if I play pawn c4, the knight gets access to my d4 square. Another thing that I could keep in mind is if I take his knight on c6, all I need to do is to find some magical way to get my knight to the d5 square, and I'm going to have this positional advantage. And my opponent only has like no time on the clock. Pawn c4 is a good try. Again, once I don't move my c pawn, I'm good. I'm definitely not going to take so that way he gets this massive attack on my c pawn. So let's just play pawn to b4 and attack the knight. Let's force the knight to move. He pulls the knight back to b7. Why did he choose b7 and not c6? Where is he trying to put the knight? Like, what if he puts the knight? Oh, he wants to put the knight here, then here. I mean, there's takes, queen takes, but I'm not really seeing my advantage. I'm going to play the move pawn to a4, so that way his knight is not able to get to the b5 square. I'm also thinking about playing the move pawn to a5, because if he push b5, he loses the a pawn. And if he takes, well, he's not going to take on a5. So rook d7, he's trying to double up his rooks on the d file. But if my bishop is on d5, then I don't think I need to worry too much about what's happening there. If I takes queen takes, if I takes queen takes, if I takes queen takes a5, there's b5. If I play a5 takes, then his knight gets the c5 square. If I play a5 takes, then I take, and after queen takes, then I play rook takes, and then his a pawn is going to be very weak. That's the variation I'm going to be playing. So if he takes, I do not want to allow his knight to get to c5 and then to d3, because my d3 square is weak. So if he takes on a5, I have to eliminate the knight first. But then if I eliminate the knight first, she's going to eliminate my rook first. And then if I take, then he takes. Okay, what if I just take on a7? If I take on a7, he takes on b4. I take on b4, but that's not what I wanted, though. That's the thing. The good thing is, if he takes on b4, I could take on a7. So let's just play rook to b1. This is actually a very dangerous pawn sacrifice. I feel very strong playing this game, to be honest, because I'm down by a pawn, but my pieces are so active. Once he takes here, the plan is to take on b7. Well, why don't I just take on a7? I'm threatening to win the knight. Yeah, why don't I just take on a7? He has to play a defensive move. And then once he plays a defensive move, then I take on b4. Yo, I'm not gonna lie, I'm cooking. Like I'm winning. I like my position. Like this bishop on f6 is not doing anything. If he takes on c3, he loses the knight. I'm actively threatening to win the knight. And if he plays a defensive move, now his knight is just pinned. And we're going to be PPing on the PP. Now we hit him with rook takes b4. I'm threatening c4 and I'm threatening the knight. Yo, look on this position. I'm completely outclassing the guy. It's over. Am I winning a piece? I have one, two, three pieces on the knight. He only has two pieces on the knight. And then the knight is pinned to the queen. So if he moves the queen, the knight, I take the queen. Maybe queen back to c8 to not immediately lose the knight, but then he loses the c4 pawn. Sheesh. If he plays queen c8, I do not take the pawn. Queen b6 wins the game. So he pulls the bishop back to e7. But now I just take the knight, son. And then after rook takes, I takes. And after queen takes, I take. Okay, he attacks the rook. Let's take on b7. And it's just GG's. Yo, I really enjoyed this game. Because there was a point in the game where I thought he had a lot of pressure on this diagonal. But now it's just over. Like, he's just going to resign. So he took, let's just take. I'm attacking his queen. I'm ahead by a piece. If he sat the queen, I just take. If he moves the queen, well, my opponent resigns.